So happy New Year, but it's really happy Halloween, isn't it? We've gone back.
It kind of is. We're stuck in that bizarre time warp that is Halloween. Haddonfield in Halloween.
I'd be quite happy to be stuck somewhere between Halloween and just before Christmas, to be honest. That's fine.
That would be okay. That's a nice period of the year, isn't it? I'd be all right with that. Yeah. Not like this, obviously. Not in Haddonfield. That would be bad.
No, Samhain, that's my time of the year.
Totally.
There's one place in all the world you don't want to be on Halloween. It's Haddonfield, right?
If you're honest, it looks like a dump.
To go by.
It looks like a dump generally to me. I'm not sure I'd want to be there any time of year.
No, I don't think I would either, to be perfectly honest. Michael Myers or no Michael Myers.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Well, he's at least a break in the monotony, isn't he?
I suppose he is, yeah.
He starts the clocks again.
Yeah.
He's almost a marker, isn't he? I mean, like, give it like 10 years and Michael Myers will just be like the weather, won't he? Oh, he's turning up again. He'll be like the groundhog on Groundhog Day, it's Michael Myers season.
Yeah.
It just happens.
It is, I mean, just picking up what Jack's saying, that it is actually...
You see a shadow, if so, I'm going to have weeks of winter.
It is kind of thrilling to see this kind of post-Frank Capra-esque American suburb on Halloween get totally screwed over by shape.
There's something oddly satisfying about it, isn't it? I mean, not to sound too terrible about it, but there's something cathartic about it. There really is.
For anyone who's grown up in suburbia, even the UK ones, and I did, I mean, my God, you want to rip the bushes out by their roots, don't you? And the little hedges.
I think every child who is raised in one of those locations has sort of forbidden, unspoken fantasies of seeing it all crumble down in some sort of metaphysical apocalypse,
Because they are sort of in their way anti-liminal spaces. I mean, liminal spaces are cool. We get excited by liminal spaces, but these things are like they're liminal spaces where everything is nullified and it's all meaning is dragged away, and
there's something so absolute about them, isn't there? And especially in like the psyche of children who are raised on the cinema that promotes them and whatnot. Which if you were born in the 80s. Or the 70s, then you are going to have this idea of what these suburbs are.
I literally walked through a street about 3 months ago, and I think I sent the photograph. I think I might have even sent the photograph to the two of you, where I went for a walk with my dog, and it was there was so much rain and umska and mud, we couldn't go to our usual haunt, and I just let her lead me where she wanted to go, really. And I think she was just following.
And she led you into a David Cronenberg film.
She led me into a street that was the 80s. I mean, it was the houses. Okay, fair enough. That we've got a mixture of Victorian. There's a little bit of 30s stuff going on, a little bit away from us, but everything about these houses was that sort of classic 1980s from my memory. But even the cars outside were these boxy cars, and some of them were, you can call it period now, I guess. And I thought, where have you brought me? You've cursed me. You've brought me back to my childhood. Don't do this to me. So the dog and I didn't speak for the rest of the week. But I only made it out by the...
Isn't it what people are now calling the late 1900s, yeah?
Yeah.
I have seen it referred to as that. Yeah. The old ones who were born in the late 1900s, there.
Yeah. Oh, crumbs.
We're edging that way, aren't we? We're edging that way. I mean, I'm 40 this year.
Oh, baby.
I know.
And yet it's strange, because I was saying this to my partner only the other night, that when I was a child, the idea of anything beyond 2000 was just too crazy to contemplate, because 2000 was a big number, symbolic.
Yeah,
it was
science fiction. It was bizarre, wasn't it?
So the last quarter of a century has been like an odd sort of bonus, really.
Well, I think this is another point that someone on the internet generally was making, that for us, time is problematic now. Measuring time is problematic exactly because of the millennium, because of the year 2000. Everything after the year 2000, it's so abstract and almost antithetical to the concept of time to us that we can't really process it.
It's not proper time, is it? It's sort of theoretical science fiction time.
Absolutely.
It's still the future.
It's almost like
it's
we've
still
gone
the future.
too far, isn't it? It's almost like we've existed beyond the end of reality and creation.
Well,
because
now
we've
I was a young person, and there was a hit record that was called Disco 2000 by Pulp, and it was let's all meet up in the year 2000. Won't it be strange when we're all fully grown? That wasn't. What?
And the thing is that what I think, going back to that childhood perspective, and because we grew up with the aftermath of things like Silver Age science fiction and so on, and then which the drag factor eventually gets into film and everything, and then where we ended up was this sort of cul-de-sac of industrial nowness, and not unchanging. There is no alternative. Tina written large, end of history. And so it feels like we've been seriously cheated as a generation.
Oh,
like, hang on, this wasn't meant to happen.
I mean, even our
it was meant to be like the Jetsons, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the dystopias that were imagined were more interesting than this, weren't they?
Because we were sort of led to, by those wonderful 80s dystopias, and then into the kind of the stuff that Philip K. Dick and Gibson were doing. I'm like, well, it might not be all that, but it's going to be interestingly bad.
Yeah, at least that's right. At least there's going to be expression and strangeness and absurdity and sort of testing the boundaries of what's human. Nah, not but really.
I did encounter.
Dick probably gets closer than most because in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is like the paradigmatic example for me. That's of the future as a place that's just exhausted. The entire everything that's still going.
Oh,
I'm still here.
Earth, and Earth is just this left.
Oh no, Jack, you're jumping in and out.
And the entire planet is now this kind of. Oh, sorry.
We're losing all your great words.
Yeah.
Oh well. I think my microphone is too good now. It's picking up other things. So it's dropping in and out.
Are you getting taxi ranks and things like that?
Yeah, I'm getting things that are happening behind doors. Never mind.
Military signals.
We've got you more consistently now. That's good.
Okay.
But no, it's a fascinating.
Well, the key obviously is for me to not talk.
But I encountered something incredibly quaint last night because I think I might have said before I've got a bit of a penchant for the long 70s and literally everything that comes with it. I mean, a lot of the films that we've covered, this film, for instance. But one of my little comfort blankets is the old 70s show, The Rockford Files. And last night's episode had me cackling because it was positively quaint, because the whole thing was pitched. Now, we're talking 1978 here. So the whole thing was pitched as being incredibly serious and heavy as subject matter, because basically what it was involving, very, very briefly, was a corporation that was buying up real estate, putting in houses, sort of cheap housing for people, but the houses were fronts for ventilation, because they were big vents for computers, and the computers were stealing and storing information on people's American citizens' private lives through their insurances and various. And there was a big disclaimer at the end. So the credits rolled. Jim Rockford saved the day, but the credits rolled. And after the end of the credits, it said, "This is a serious situation that we're facing now, and heaven only knows what it would be like by, say, the mid '80s." You think, my God, I'm looking at this from the perspective of 2024. Everyone's like, yeah, everyone's got my information. And your information and his information, and how many cookies have been taken today? I don't know. But it was presented in such a, and of course it is. It is. We've been inured so effectively, and it's like, wow, this is like this. The coda to the whole thing, where they sort of wrap up the case and they're having their little discussion, which is obviously a very pointed discussion because they're discussing the theme, but in that rather quaint 70s way. And it's like, but the absolute in character fear of, oh my gosh, one day, you know, everything about us will be on a computer and it can be accessed by major corporations and even the government. And you're like, whoa,
wow, really?
You know, this is really in real time, not that long ago, you know.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, the fact that it's treated with such gravity back then as though it is an actual crisis, you know, which it is. You're right, it is an actual crisis, but we just can't. I think, for one thing, we just can't get our heads around it. That's one thing.
Yeah,
we
so
can't
it
get our
feels
heads around
quaint.
it.
It feels quaint, which is really an extraordinary reaction. But there it is.
Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, you know, whatever fourth and fifth and sixth parties are listening in on this conversation, you can be included too. We're referencing you, Mr. FBI agent, Mr. Whoever.
Yeah, and of course, that same year as Halloween. What does that tell you? There's a link.
There's something going on. 1979. Yeah, there's something really going on.
Halloween 79. I thought it was 78. My mistake.
Yeah, 79. I think. Am I correct? I believe, anyway. Late 70s. So we're moving into neoliberalism.
No,
here.
it's 78.
Starting to kick off.
78. I just did a check.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
78.
So we are moving into neoliberalism here. It's all starting to kick off.
Oh boy, yeah.
The end of history and the end of everything.
He laughed nervously.
Yeah.
And also this whole film is very much about time and
it's
cycles.
An odd one, actually. I mean, I was thinking about this when I was watching it. A lot of people are going to be seeing the title of this one and thinking, well, why are they doing that? Why is that? That is not really part of their milieu, you know? Because of the superficial understandings of this film.
And I didn't realize how much of an, because I've not seen it for a long time. And
Likewise.
Then the decision was made, let's do Halloween. I thought, well, we've had a bit of a Carpenter season, so that'd be quite nice. And watching it was like, this film is such a fantastic sleight of hand. It is. This is a film where the producers or the people who wanted a particular kind of film had their particular kind of film, while Carpenter went off and did so much else. It's an incredible piece of work.
It is, and it's odd how misunderstood it is on a general level, not just a popular level, but academically, like in critical circles. The general analyses of this film that are out there tend to be rather aesthetic and very literal.
This is a hauntological work dressed up as a slasher movie.
Totally.
And barely dressed up, really.
Right, barely dressed up. Right. I mean, it's there. It's overt, isn't it? You look at the credit sequence and the assignation of the creature as the shape. That's it for me. That does it for me. That demonstrates that this is not as a result of some problems with the filmmaking or anything like that, or some inconsistency. This is something deliberate. This is something absolutely deliberate.
And he lays clue after clue and sign after sign all the way through. And yet, as you say, it seems to me, certainly by doing a little look around myself, it has been bizarrely avoided. The things that it's about.
Well, they talk about, I think part of the problem is the way the sequels went, which is they established that Michael Myers is Michael Myers, and there are all these elaborate, bizarre motivations for why the character is going after Laurie Strode and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, it's an important thing, actually. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things I thought I'd better get in early, and I almost forgot, which is... I'm not going to pretend as though those sequels don't exist, but for the most part, I watched this film and sort of I will probably be coming at this film tonight as if it is just this text.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm not. And I'm going to possibly ignore the subsequent ones, unless, of course, it becomes relevant or germane.
The only thing I would say is late on, I think it's around Halloween 4 or 5. It may even be Halloween 6. It does start to acknowledge the more hauntological and supernatural aspect.
It doesn't do it very well, because I do remember, but it does do it. Yes, you're absolutely
bad,
right.
But it does do it. There's one of them, and
I haven't seen anything past.
Well, I cannot remember for the life of me which one it is, but there's one of them where whatever
3
is sort of wearing Michael Myers as its costume passes on to his niece at the conclusion.
That's 4, yeah. That's 4.
Yeah.
And 4 into, and there's a curious, now I'm picking up from memories from the 1990s now, because I've seen them all once, with the exception of this, which I've now seen twice. Yes, I do remember. I think it's the end of 5 where you get this curious sequence where they actually put Michael Myers in prison, and then this figure, this great, as I recall it. And apologies to anyone who is a Halloween aficionado, and I'm getting this entirely wrong, but basically the jail. The main door of the jail blows in. There's a great plume of fire, and this dark figure walks down and releases Michael Myers. And then you get this whole other thing that there's a cult, and that he is some kind of product of the cult. It's
suggested that there are lots of like Michael Myerses, isn't it? That there are these people who are possessed or opened up to whatever these forces or entities are. Because he's shot numerous times, like Michael is this person by the cops, right?
That's right.
I mean, he literally breaks through the facade of a police station and just massacres all of the cops. He's just chucking them around like they're rag dolls,
But of course, what it does is it over-explains what is a fantastically ambiguous film, which is, to use the word you just did, so open to interpretation and so much more interesting by leaving huge imponderables floating.
I mean, it's something like you said earlier, I did not notice until I watched it this time. And I've watched this film a few times in my life, but there are moments that, when you examine them, can only be explained by there being something supernatural happening.
Doors close and lock as if by telekinetic intervention in this film. I mean, I'm telling you, there is no reason, no pressure changes can make doors shut and lock the way they do in Halloween.
Oh,
this is a hauntological.
That's in my note.
I mean, and that's just
the one that gets me is the killing of go ahead.
Oh,
if you can
I think we're
even
having
hear
some
me, I don't know.
technical issues. Yeah, we're having some technical issues on your side, Jack, at the moment.
I heard Jack start something.
Yeah, and then it
lost him
drifted
completely.
off.
Well, I stopped because I didn't think you were hearing what I was saying. I heard the beginning.
I heard the beginning, but not what came after. It seemed to dip out again.
Right, that might have just been me stopping from politeness then. Indistinguishable from a technical error. I was just going to say that the bit that gets me in the original film is the killing of Bob, the young man with the glasses, because he's, if you take the film's representation literally, he's pinned to the wall sort of in midair by having one bread knife or something just jammed into his chest. That's just not possible. That can't possibly happen. And you're not going to tell me that people on set and nobody on set realized that was ridiculous. They must have known that they were portraying just not physically possible. So clearly something else is going on here. And they even have Michael himself sort of staring at the body as it hangs impossibly in midair. And he looks kind of puzzled, like, that's interesting. Why is that happening? I don't understand.
Tilting of the head.
I did it.
Which becomes like a motif in the later films, doesn't it? It's something that sort of just happens. It's something that the character does. But here, and you marry that to these other imponderables where he seems to manifest out of shadow. He can appear and disappear, even in broad daylight, right? There's those wonderful sequences where Laurie sees him out of the window, or when she's walking down the street. It's wonderful. Yeah. It's absolutely wonderful. I love that.
When he's haunting Laurie in her little circle in the streets of Haddonfield during the day, that's the best bit of the film for me. That's the bit that I actually find it gets a little bit slow and boring once you get to Halloween night itself. It's the build-up that I like.
Yes, I agree. There's just a point towards the end of the second reel where it starts to get a little bit generic Friday the 13th-y. And I know Friday the 13th is a near contemporary, but even then a number of the features or tropes of slasher movies superficially had already been established, and that's the point where it starts to become a slasher movie. And I think it once you have the death of particularly in the car, it starts to climb out of that in an interesting way. But yes, you're right. I think there is a point where it almost has to go through the motions of that kind of film in order to do this really, really strong ending. But I think once you bring horror into daylight, I mean, I always used to say this was something that was forced on Hammer Studios. We always had to shoot the New Forest in the afternoon, but the strange effect was that it made being in the woods in the afternoon kind of unsettling. And this is the same thing. Suburbia by daylight, slightly drizzly day, and then sometimes windy day and completely dry. I mean, that's another thing. We can put that down to just the continuity or the discontinuities of filming, but also if we are to look upon this as in just a straight ahead way, even the very elements don't behave as they should from shot to shot and scene to scene.
No. That's absolutely true. I mean, there is a sequence in this quite a fair ways in that really got me this time, and it's the one just after Laurie has first been attacked by Michael, after she's been stabbed in the arm and fallen off the stairs, and she gets out of the house. But this is a fairly central suburban street on Halloween night, and there's no one. There's nothing. There's nobody around. And it's dark and it's silent, and she's knocking on doors and people are not answering. She's obviously in distress. She's screaming for help. Now, on the one hand, you could just put that down to being a commentary upon the alienated nature of 1970s suburbia. Yeah. No one's going to help you if you're shrieking at the door. On the other hand, for me, there is something uncanny about that whole sequence. It's too quiet. It's too isolated. There's no one around on Halloween night. On that street there are no kids. There's no one that she can appeal to,
but it's
and
very
no one is answering their door.
With the way the presence of people or the absence of people is because we have inherited or co-opted some of the features of the American Halloween into our own. But what's fascinating watching this film is the kids, of course, they're children, so they're taken out early by guardians and parents and elder siblings, and then parents are probably doing their own thing. Obviously, we know what the older teenagers are doing. They're either trying to meet and get off with each other or whatever. So there's this kind of
working
dead
around
moment.
the huge babysitting economy, aren't they? There's this
huge
entire
economy
in Haddonfield that is just teenagers being paid to be in the same house as smaller children while they have sex. Yes. Teenagers, I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, we joke, but it's almost kind of part of the commentary of the film in certain respects, isn't it? I mean, at the beginning of it, absolutely. That wonderful opening sequence, which is fantastically iconic in horror cinema. There are little subtle suggestions about the family dynamic that Michael operates in. He seems to be neglected, if not abused. No one knows where he is. The parents are off somewhere. The sister has no idea where he is. And when you first see Michael, he's staring into the house from the outside.
Yeah.
There's something very odd there.
This is something that the film It Follows sort of takes up and runs with many years later. It's a film I have my issues with. But one of the things I liked about It Follows was the way it's just set in a world of teenagers. There's no adults in that film. The entire world is just teenagers. The adults are not in evidence.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, because one of my notes was, rather glibly, when I was thinking about this, I made this mental note to myself: this is Invasion of Peanuts. I mean, these kids are in that hinterland between children and adults, but they seem to be, like you were saying, Jack, doing the childcare. The parents are distant. The teacher talks like the school mom from Charlie Brown movies.
So
they've even got her on that pitch, that wop, 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 Laurie. Laurie is kind of Marcy come Charlie Brown. I think more Charlie Brown, because when I thought this about, my God, is this film in some way Carpenter having joking. It's like it's the invasion of peanuts, because there's this. It started to make me think about at the very end of the film, which you alluded to, George, about Laurie after she falls down the stairs, and is that we get this thing that turns up in these kinds of movies at this point, and slightly ahead as well. The idea of that exemplified by Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a few others, Friday the 13th, the final girl. The final girl,
obviously,
and in these kinds of movies, it seems to me, and this one I think makes the point more clearly than any other, and I think that's testament to Carpenter, really. Trying to connect it to this kind of invasion of peanuts thing, this invasion of Charlie Brown thing, is, traditionally that final girl, it seems to me, usually what happens is the final girl suddenly shifts into traditionally very boyish abilities. Like the final girls suddenly become very practical, very resourceful. They suddenly start acquiring a lot of, quote unquote, air quotes here, boyish signifiers. And of course, who's watching these movies? Younger teenage boys who are getting the illicit thing of, I'm watching a horror movie. So it's a substitution. They know that they cut. There's no point having a very capable young man traditionally seen, in that patriarchal way, solving the problem, because that's still too distant. That's still too far ahead. So they have these young women who suddenly gather a lot of boyish traits, traditionally boyish traits, that then they plug in to that sort of patriarchal perception. But with this movie, she's already been presented as a kind of Charlie Brown figure in a film that's already kind of riffing on Peanuts, and which suggests to me a real awareness of how these tropes work for Carpenter. And that's why he's pulling on the threads of them, and it almost feels like this grisly satire, as I say, of Charles Schulz. It's so bizarre, even as I say, down to the very specific way in which they get the actor who isn't seen playing the teacher to hit those notes that the teacher in the Charlie Brown films hits. It's extraordinary, but just seems to tie together the final girl, her as a kind of avatar of Charlie Brown in so many ways as well. She's so many ways Laurie Strode is Charlie Brown. It's unbelievable, except she doesn't carry around quite the same self-pity and sentimentalizing, but that's obviously because Carpenter was bound to make a cooler thing than Charlie Brown. But it's there, bubbling.
It's something that hit me again on this viewing. The characterization of Laurie is really interesting, because she's not especially likable, is she? She's oddly diffident, and she's a bit apart from everyone else, and she's a little bit of a stick in the mud, isn't she?
She's also deeply voyeuristic, which connects her to both Lumis as well as Michael. Well,
to Michael, or whatever that thing is.
Deeply voyeuristic. She's always looking through curtains and windows, or trying to look into places, or whatever. Yeah.
I think that struck me about her on this watch is that she's a people pleaser. She's one of those people that's incredibly malleable according to what she thinks the person she's with wants from her. She tries to be. She's not, there's always the whole thing about the slasher movie. The girl that survives is the quote unquote good one. She's the one that doesn't have sex. She's the one that doesn't do the bad things. Well, the film kind of goes out of its way to let you know that, it conforms to that. And that was already a pattern, I think, that existed. This film didn't invent that.
Absolutely.
And it conforms to that. But it goes out of its way to kind of let you know that Laurie is quote unquote good, not through choice exactly, but because she's inhibited and neurotic. These aren't necessarily words I would use, but they're part of, I think, her characterization according to the film. She's it's not that she doesn't want to do the bad things. It's just that she does smoke a joint in the course of the film and stuff like that. We know that she has that she fancies boys and things like that. She's shy, and she feels. There's one point where she's alone, and she actually says to herself, "Calm down" or "relax" or something like that. She's characterized as somebody who is neurotic and anxious. Well, that's an interesting inflection that I hadn't caught before.
No, absolutely, and so different.
Which is again
what she
totally
would
the Charlie
inspire.
Brown thing, and the way that the other kids adopt the roles of those other Charlie Brown characters, the Lucys and the whatnots, and get at her for it. That they want that she's part of their scene, but she's the whipping girl as well.
But she is also quite judgmental as well. As a result of not being able to have access to these things that she wants, she then turns that into judgmentalism, a kind of moralism against her friends, right? Who are vivacious and out there and enjoying themselves. It's really interesting. That dynamic is so much more complex than the archetype that this character would be in later films, in later slasher films.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And often very much empty. I mean, you know, the lead girls in, well, for example, the Friday the 13th films. I mean, apart from a bit of agency they acquire at the end, and again, I think it's largely as a way for boys to put themselves into the drama. They get nothing.
There are exceptions.
Laurie doesn't get straightforward things, but she gets interesting ones.
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions in the genre, in the subgenre, but they tend to come from films that are deliberately lampooning the subgenre anyway. So it's just Sidney
or
Prescott
taking it to a much more sophisticated level. I mean, the obvious one is Alien.
Obviously,
it runs on so many of the staples of a slasher movie, including Ellen Ripley herself, but it's working at such a different level.
Yeah, and
Ripley in the original Alien she's characterized. The film characterizes Ripley. We know who that person is by the time we get more than halfway through the film. When she starts to take on the contours of the lead character, she really only starts happening after it's somewhere between Dallas dying and or disappearing, I should say, and you know. She's starting to get there, and then you only realize she's the lead character. It's not quite as late as some people think it is, but she's not really the lead character. But you know who she is quite soon into the film, and she's not particularly likable. She's arrogant, she's officious, she's elitist, she's snobbish. She's quite cold-blooded. I mean, she might be right with the thing about not letting the party back onto the ship because of the quarantine rules. She might be technically right, but it's cold. It's a hard, tough decision. So it's not really to do with she's a company woman. You know, in a film that's very scathing about corporate culture and the corporate employment hierarchy. She's the corporate woman. She starts to look less like that because she encounters Ash, which is kind of he is the literal embodiment of the company as a presence, you know. But yeah, you mentioned the Neve Campbell character in Scream. She's a goody-goody. Yeah, she's a goody-goody, and I like that film. But that film, it's one of the things I noticed watching Halloween again is that film is completely redundant because Halloween is already doing the things that Scream does. Scream just does them open and just does them literally. Scream just has the characters analyze slasher films at each other in the dialogue. Halloween is already analyzing the slasher film when it's being the progenitor of that entire massive genre of 80s onwards American slasher films. It's already doing it. It's already analyzing its own genre conventions.
That's right. It's just doing it with a different vocabulary, isn't it? You know, Scream does it with a sort of black comedy.
Implicit.
I mean, one of the ways I think in which Carpenter very cleverly and quietly announces to us this is this isn't a slasher movie. This isn't what you think it is by those by the use of the two other films, Thing from Another World and Forbidden Planet. Because the Thing from Another World, what I find so fascinating in the tail end of that second reel, as I say, when the film starts to get going again, is that the Thing from Another World, the Howard Hawks movie, keeps being announced as the scary movie of the night, even when they're showing Forbidden Planet instead. And it's like, I was watching thinking, this is really, really interesting because this guy, Carpenter, really knows his stuff here because he's going to remake The Thing from Another World in a couple of years. He knows what he's doing. So it's the shape is not just some alien presence roaming around, i.e. like The Thing from Another World. It is a force made manifest. It's more id monster Forbidden Planet than Thing from Another World. And this is because, as we said, it's not really a slasher movie. It sets up the schematic and then keeps substituting. So then you suddenly get some logic to the breakdown in logic. How can a man be hanging by a single bread knife? How do doors shut? What really is going on with Michael? It's because he's already kind of telling you in that in the kind of meta fashion that we appreciate slightly more than the just basic glib pomo, is you think you're watching one film, you're watching another. The kids are watching a film that's being announced constantly as The Thing from Another World, and it is at times, and then it's suddenly Forbidden Planet.
It's suddenly not, right?
and the content of Forbidden Planet is actually more of a key to this movie than the content of The Thing from Another World. And you're like, whoa, this is like,
what's Forbidden Planet about? On at least on one level, it's about a man that wants to fuck his own daughter.
It's about a man who wants to fuck his own daughter, and who opens up to something big and malevolent, a shape, which then just starts an onslaught. Yeah. I mean,
it's fascinating.
Called an id monster for a reason. It's so fucking eatable. It's unbelievable.
Well, yeah. I mean, like Michael Myers is this powerfully hyper masculine force, right, in all of the darkest possible ways, and even in like a sort of a cult way. I mean, his victims are effectively sacrifices, right? It seems. I mean, when I was watching it this time round, the manner in which he selects the victims from Haddonfield is really fascinating. It's really fascinating. All of the characters that he stalks throughout the night, he stalks in the day too. He finds them and he observes them. He watches them. And it's almost as though they are pieces in a rite or a spell or something to that effect. They are people that he is attracted to and driven to murder.
It's also absolutely about sex. It's absolutely about sexual desire and male sexual violence. And we know that because Michael stalks and watches the young children, the male children, but he's not interested in them as murder victims. It's funny, I rewatched because I got the Blu-ray box set, the Blu-ray box set starring yourself, George, of Hellbound, the Arrow box set. So I watched Hellbound just the other night, and I was having recently rewatched Halloween, and then I'm watching Hellbound. The little bit where Tiffany summons the Cenobites, she opens the box, and they turn up, and there's this really, really strange, edgy moment of ambiguity where these S&M sex torture monsters are surrounding this underage girl, and they kind of look like, what do we do now? And then Pinhead turns up and he has the wonderful line, my favorite moment in the entire film probably, it's not hands that call us, it's desire. And they just leave Tiffany alone because she doesn't count, because she's not part of the map of desire, the game board of desire and sex that they're on. And Michael is not interested in the little boy, he's not interested in the little girl. He watches them, but they are non-playable characters as far as he's concerned, because they're not sexual.
Yeah, the way I read his fascination with the boy, because he does stalk the boy, he watches the boy anyway. When he's at school, my read of that is that the boy, it's almost like he's summoning Michael, because he is being bullied about his fear of the boogeyman, of the spirit of Halloween, and he also manifests what Michael was, of course, or what Michael could have been.
Yes, absolutely.
That's got to be there. But also, I think the way that male energy and that male sexuality manifests is so interesting, even in very small ways, because one of my favorite moments in the movie, because I think it just says so much about a certain kind of male sexuality and male, is the moment when he's driving in the car and one of the girls says, "Oh, you jerk," and he screeches to a halt as if he's going to do something there and then. And that's "don't laugh at me" energy.
Yeah,
that's a man.
How dare you?
How dare a woman laugh at me?
How dare a young woman laugh at me?
Exactly, and you just know in that sequence, in that hiatus, he's having to force himself back to the original plan or ritual or whatever it is, because he is ready at that point to just break out, because it's that "how dare you." It is that the impunity of male sexuality and male. Yeah, it's really in that moment. It's such a curious moment.
You see it,
and you get moments like that. He's he's triggered to kill one of the girls when he sees her take her clothes off. It's absolutely, he decides the time has come because her clothes get messy or something, and she takes her clothes off, and he's spying on her. And it's her nakedness that does it. At the beginning, it's his sister's nakedness. It's the fact that his sister has had sex, rather than paying attention to him, rather than fulfilling the role she was put in by their parents, which is to be the substitute mother. She was doing her own thing instead with another boy, with a different boy. So she has to die for that. And the sister is obviously a fixation. It's absolutely, and this is where already at this point, this entire subgenre that will be sparked. As I say, it's not the first slasher movie, but it will. It's the movie.
But it is a great innovator.
The slasher movie as the subgenre that we know, right? And it sparks this entire subgenre, and accompanying it, we have this entire sort of hackneyed critical orthodoxy about the slasher film, which is that it's about a newly conservative America in the 1980s and punishing young people for having sex and punishing girls for having sex and stuff like this. No. It's a depiction. It's not expressing that. It's not saying that. It's a depiction of that mindset. Michael is that mindset.
Yes. Because those moments of titillation are just that in other films. Like the directors
how dare
of the Friday
she
the
cause
13th
me to feel this way?
Movies.
How dare she exist and be in such a way that she makes me feel the things that she makes me feel? She must be punished for this, because it can't be my fault, obviously. It must be her fault.
No.
Yeah, and yet there is an extraordinary. I don't disagree with that, but I think there's an extraordinary moment at the end of that opening scene, and I'd love to know what the hell John Carpenter whispered into that young boy actor's ear before, because that boy, when that mask is pulled up, and I think in a strange sort of way, Jack, it taps into something that you described in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me about Leland. Because when that mask is pulled up, he's not vacant, as Lumis describes him. He looks bemused, almost pained,
bewildered.
And do you think, confused. What the hell did Carpenter whisper in that kid's ear before? Because that is not what you expect when the mask. I mean, you get the initial shock of it's a child, although I think there are you can kind of guess that in the early stages. But then it's like, the expression on that kid's face is not anything that Lumis tells us later.
No. It's a total contrast to what Lumis describes, isn't it? This is still Michael, right? This is some of the last we'll ever see of Michael himself.
I don't doubt that rage and that sense of I should have been looked after, and that decision to punish is there. I don't doubt that for a moment. No. But what a curious capstone to that scene.
Well, this is what's so terrifying about that. It exists just free, that worldview. It doesn't have to be conscious. It doesn't have to be formulated. It can be in the male in such a way that the male doesn't understand it, and maybe even doesn't even consciously feel it. It's become a power. It is a power outside himself. It's patriarchy. It's
It leads us right back to Leland and Bob, doesn't it? It leads us right there. Except the only difference is that Leland obviously matures and therefore can play the game of, but I'm a good guy. This is a child, so therefore the child is just bewildered.
It's as though the
dynamic, and it also explains why the killer in this film is both Michael Myers and the Shape, because they are
they're one. They're one, right.
Absolutely, both the person and the idea.
And it's beautifully symbolized, actually, I think, in the moment when we first see grown-up Michael. And it's a fantastically shot scene, because he jumps on the back of that hospital car and the scene is lit in red. It's like he jumps out of hell.
Yes, there's a sort of
incredible, an obviously red light effect as well. There's nothing naturalistic about that. It's the whole of the behind the car is lit in vivid red, and he just jumps out of it. Yes, it is very Argento, and he just leaps out of hell onto the back of that car. I mean, my God, there it is.
I mean, going back
the
to
Argento reference is probably conscious and deliberate, because Argento was one of the people that was doing these sorts of movies before Halloween.
And you know that Carpenter is interested in international cinema because of the references he pays to British cinema, of course, and television all the way through his films. He is aware of this stuff. But going back to the boy Michael for just a second, that opening sequence, it's as though the dynamic of familial neglect, which is implied, and the defeat of his expectations of what his sister is supposed to be to him by her having sex within his purview opens him up. It's almost like it opens him to whatever the possessing force is, which is, of course, as you say, Jack, it's essentially the demon patriarchy, right?
Mm.
It's making a metaphor
basically
out of that situation.
Yeah, her blood is the ink with which the contract is signed, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she does nothing wrong. You know, she's obviously she's a teenager, but she's obviously
herself, right?
she's a young woman. So she's both at once. So A, she shouldn't be having to do parental labor for her parents, and B, she's perfectly entitled to start having her social life. You know, she is not Michael's mother.
Exactly.
But of course she is the natural locus of the feelings of any feelings of resentment, any feelings of anger that he feels.
I mean, funnily enough, I was thinking of this exact thing, but not about this film. I was thinking about another film that we're going to be doing, which is Hereditary, which has almost exactly the same dynamic, but inverted. There is a similar situation where a teenage boy is given responsibility over a clearly troubled child, you know, a child that has numerous different difficulties, which he could not have been given responsibility over, and something tragic happens. And that is the parents' fault. It's not the boy's fault.
And yet,
it is
even
in no
at
way
his age, he will have imbibed an awful
Hereditary
lot about...
directly references Halloween in certain very explicit ways.
Even as this young boy, he will have already absorbed so much of the entitlement of being a boy, and so how it's
the younger boy child of a family. Yes, he would have been babied and closeted, and everything would have been.
I mean,
done.
it provoked a conversation between my partner and I at the end, because I said to her, you know what, this has just reminded me. I said, I can clearly remember as a child, as a little boy, realizing that in some way I'd won a kind of lottery by being born a boy. I can remember just thinking, oh, I could have been born a girl, and thinking that was because, again, there's so much, and you're young and you're susceptible, and you haven't formed, you haven't formed, but you haven't got all the details yet. You haven't, the reach of your empathy is somewhat limited. You're a child. You don't understand what's really happening. But I remember as a little boy thinking that, say, oh God, I've got Christmas, Easter, and birthdays all rolled into one. I was born a boy, and and that made me both right and wrong.
Yeah.
That conversation came out of watching this, and I said, because of how that opening scene manifests, it's that and as I say, the bewilderment at the end is just a fantastic payoff, because I've done it now, and I knew I had to do it, but oh God, I've done it now. It's very strong. It's brilliantly put together.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? And the camera work during the build up to the murder, and during the murder itself, you get this really curious thing when you're looking through Michael's eyes, and he looks up at the knife as he's holding it and as it's coming down, as though he is removed from the act, as though he can't quite believe that it's happening.
Yeah. And of course, partially, going by everything that we've just discussed, he is. That doesn't mean his agency is gone, but it's compromised. And of course, as you say, just technically, but I think this is something about Carpenter as well. I mean, Carpenter was working with low budgets, and he was working
and this with something that was very low budget, ridiculously low.
I mean, he was using mates basically, but also, like, there was a particular thing that obviously they, as in the people behind the film, wanted, which he didn't quite give them. But even, not only in terms of how he folds other films into his films, whether that's explicitly like the Thing from Another World and Forbidden Planet, or the references to the sort of inversions of Frank Capra movies, or this beginning is basically horror movies start of Touch of Evil. I mean, it's the continuous unbroken shot, rope, although it is broken, but it's broken in deft ways, like the putting on of the mask, and turning a corner into darkness and coming out again, so the shadow allows for a cut, and so on. And the Dario Argento references and things like that. He's already placing it. He's already sort of, at the same time as he's telling us a story, he is saying, "This is the kind of filmmaker I am. I'm not just a hack. I work in the context of pulp, and I work in the context of this sort of lurid, but this is me. I've got an awareness that goes beyond this. And if you stick with this story, you will see that it's not going to do the things that you think it's going to do."
The documentaries, the makings of this film are so interesting because he didn't necessarily want to make this film. This was just a way of getting his foot in the door. What was happening at the time, people were making low rent, low budget horror films. So that's what you did when you had very little experience as a director and as a writer, right? And that's what he did. It just so happened that this film did gangbusters.
Yeah.
It tapped into something very fundamental. I think the time of its release, that transition from the 70s to the 80s probably helped a great deal. Such a turbulent period where sort of gender politics and sexual politics are being thrust into the mainstream.
It's a great deal of what we've talked about before with films in this period. We've talked, how we've talked about it. So many, the Eisenhower dream becoming the nightmare of Watergate in Vietnam. Yeah. Michael Myers' first kill is 1 month before Dealey Plaza. I mean, it's all there. Everything is neat and safe and cordoned off in suburbia, suburban America. But, then it's saying, just how safe is it? Male violence erupting against women, against young women. Young children watch it on screens, picking it up, imbibing it. Yeah. The cycles continue. But also,
it's all there, right?
With the sophistication, Carpenter, of knowing that in any society and in any culture, sex and violence do have to go somewhere. There is still rage and desire and an impulse to smash it all apart and create anew. And suburbia and small town values, we talked about it at the top of the conversation, they can be crippling. And Michael as this shape, this personification of, if you like, dark impulses that goes on this violent spree at a time of year when that society has neatly carved out a day for horror, a consumer holiday for tricks and rituals and terror. It's perfect.
That is steeped in anxious folklore and anxious urban legends.
Very specifically. Urban legends. Urban legends is one of my notes.
It is writing that's what new folklore, isn't it? Which is also old folklore, of course, for suburbia.
Yeah. And of
course, all folklore is just the reiteration of previous folklore. That's just what folklore is.
Exactly.
They even tell the classic stories, to each other. The teenagers, even the moments at the beginning with Michael on the boogeyman. The boogeyman.
Right. But even the boogeyman.
The Michael on the car on the top is the old banging head on the top of the car story.
Right. It's exactly. That's what this film is. This film, on its most fundamental level, is it takes those stories that teenagers, particularly teenagers, tell each other, the urban legends,
telephone,
the guy on top of the car, the razor blade in the bobbing apple that you get for Halloween, the penny on the train track that derails the train, the woman's driving home and the car behind her is pulling right up and flashing its lights and shouting, and she thinks she's being chased.
Still in the house.
Yeah, exactly, all that stuff. And it takes those stories that are told to comfortably express anxieties and fears to sort of bat them around with always this little escape hatch at the back where it's all a bunch of bullshit. Basically, on some level, everybody knows when they bat these stories around, it's a bunch of crap. It takes that schema, that version of the world, and it says, no, in what you're watching, that stuff is real.
It's true. It's real, right?
And not only that, it makes it, I think, frighteningly super real at the end, because I think one of the second reveal is the great moment in the back half of the film, because you get this impassive looking handsome man, no monstrosity. The only disfigurement is from where she's poked him in the eye with the coat hanger. Well, 78 was the year of Bundy. Myers is revealed as someone in that brief moment. There's this handsome as Bundy, and they even pull, as you just alluded to there, George, the telephone call story, which taps into what Bundy did in one of his killings. So then you've gone through the horror, the hauntological horror, the urban legend horror, and then just before this film ends and before we get another wonderful moment of supernatural horror, you get this image of, and this guy's currently, it will be in court in a few months, and you're going to see him. And he's going to become one of the most famous serial killers, and he's going to become an odd kind of negative celebrity. And then when you watch this movie in that context, it just takes on this extra layer of terrifying. And it's the thing I always say. I always sort of say to people, you know, as much as you can, do try and watch. It's so difficult because we are watching from particular vantage points, but if you can watch a movie or a piece of television from within the context it was delivered, these extra things are dynamite, because I properly, you know, lifted out of my seat and went, oh my God, he's like Bundy.
He's like Bundy, right.
And then Vicky went, oh,
Bundy was idolized in a strange way. I mean, famously during his trial, he represents himself and the judge is praising him and saying, oh, you could have, it's a shame about killing all those women, I suppose, and girls, because you're a good lawyer. It's a shame that you went the way you did, my boy, or son, or whatever he calls him. And then just before he's executed, he's interviewed on television by this, can't remember the guy's name, but he's this far-right religious leader. And he does this great big interview where he tells the American viewers all about, well, actually, none of this is my fault because I became addicted to pornography. So actually, the real problem is porn and therefore immorality and sex, and
which is manifested in women, right? Women being sexual,
exactly.
Women being themselves.
And it's right back to what I was. It's right back to what Michael is inarticulately and not consciously thinking or feeling behind the mask at the start of the film, which is how dare she make me feel this way? I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I do when I look at her. It can't be my fault, so it must be hers. Therefore, she needs to be eradicated.
He is defeating my patriarchal expectations of what she's supposed to be, and how dare she. It's confusing me, it's making me angry, and I don't like it. And it's her fault. She manifests it, so she must be gotten rid of.
The greatness of the movie is that you know that there will be a portion of that audience who go, well, and that's the horror. That's the horror, right? That's the horror behind the horror of this movie.
Well, this is it, right?
Aware of that.
The film is so aware of that because of the way it portrays the teenage girls, right? And they are largely just normal teenage girls, but they are
those girls,
right,
or variations on them.
They're just normal teenage girls, right? And they're actually quite well portrayed here. They're actually quite, you know, they're interesting characters. They're complex characters. They're not doing anything particularly wrong either, you know. But this genre later on certainly will portray them as though they're doing things wrong, and as though it's a punishment, right? It's almost like a divine punishment. That's what these killers are.
The second film leans directly into that. The second film goes directly to, this nurse is a slut, therefore she deserves to be.
She deserves to die. Yeah,
but
and in a vile way, by the way.
Everywhere in the film, it permeates the fabric of the film. There is that really uncomfortable sequence where the sheriff encounters Laurie, and he sets her up. She can't see him, but he's out of shot. But he must know she's about to bump into him, and the whole scene and the way it's played out is so very icky. This kind of slightly leering middle-aged man who's wearing the badge of authority and is being very patrician-like, but at the same time undercurrent. And then he looks back at her as she walks away, and twice, I think he turns his head twice, and Carpenter keeps his camera on him, and it's like, it's even there. It's just everywhere, and
there is something really. There's
just
so
horrible
subtext in this film, isn't there? There's so much of the story and the back mythology that is unspoken, that complexifies the whole thing. The killings of the girls, like when Michael murders men in this film, for the most part, the only reason he does it is because they're in the way. And it's very quick, and they're dispatched. They're out of the way. There's nothing like ritualistic about it. But when the girls are killed,
absolutely crucially, when he kills males, you don't get the POV shot of the murder.
Right.
The film does not show you murders of boys or men from Michael's point of view. When he kills Bob, you see it happening from off to one side.
Yeah.
You see them in profile facing each other. I think for most of it, anyway.
Yeah.
The killings of the girls, you always get at least part of it from his point of view. That I think is what this film is pulling. That is, it is adapting it's standard in the Italian giallo serial killer film that you get loads of it from the killer's point of view. You get the POV shot of his hands while he's putting his black gloves on, etc., etc., etc. That's built into the genre in that style of it. Carpenter moves that into the American version, because that's not in The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Carpenter moves it into the American version of the serial killer, the slasher film, and he makes it into a direct comment on the fact that these killings are motivated by frustrated male desire and misogyny. And he's also bringing in the fact that the audience is complicit right from the very start. As you say, the opening shot of the film is this gigantic long tracking shot that is from Michael's point of view. And he is, right at the start of the film, he is saying this murder is about looking. It is about seeing and looking and hating what you desire and wanting to destroy that which you desire for making you desire it. And it is a male gaze. It's the male gaze, of the female. And it is nothing to do with it's nothing to do with anything rational, because it's a child doing it. It's a male child. He is already bewilderedly impregnated and possessed by this free-floating spirit, which is essentially, we're talking about misogynistic ideology, patriarchal ideology. And you, the audience, are also part of that point of view, because look, here you are, and you are seeing it. You are looking at this. You are looking at this naked young woman as she is being murdered. You are looking at the knife that is being used to do it with. He is making you complicit right from the start. And Carpenter has this weird way of doing this thing where he does things that I normally don't like, but he does them in a way that I like. He brings in the idea of the audience complicity by showing the audience what the audience wants to see, because obviously it's a slasher movie. You want to see murders, and bringing in this implication of complicity on the part of the audience.
Want to see,
But he does it with a point. He does it because what he's talking about is, exactly.
And I guess the logic of the logic of Laurie Strode, and as I say, I want to put aside the later revelations about their siblings and stuff.
Let's because it's
we don't need it.
Contrived bullshit, isn't it? It's so stupid.
Yeah,
that doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. But presumably, the logic of Laurie Strode is that because she's the first young woman he sees from the perspective of the old house. So I guess because she, how she is established as being the one who does not do these things that her friends and contemporaries do, but she becomes the catalyst to start the whole thing going again, presumably because actually she's not sister, she's substitute for sister in that moment, because she's the first young woman who comes close to the house. Is that
he is firstly one of the coups of the film is the fact that we see Laurie outside the house through the double windows in the house front door. So it echoes the point of view shot from behind the mask. We have the sister seen through the two eye holes in the mask in the opening shot, and then we have Laurie seen through the two windows with the inside of the house. It's in deep contrast or overexposure or something. So it's just blackness. It's just blackness with two eye holes that are the windows. So it echoes that directly. But the thing is, watching it this time, I don't know how deliberate this was, but it doesn't look to me like he's really trying to kill her, because he suddenly becomes an incredibly inefficient killer when he's trying to kill Laurie.
But he's killing Laurie,
he's true. He's completely got her. She's unaware of his presence. He's right behind her. He's in the darkness. He's got the knife, and he somehow manages only to cut her arm. And then when she falls over the banister and when he scrambles down after her after she falls over the banister and falls down the stairs, it looks more like concern. It looks more like,
how interesting.
Are you okay?
Wow.
It's almost desultory, isn't it? That's really different. You're right. He could have killed her at myriad different points.
He has multiple opportunities to kill her. That's why she's not really a final girl in the proper sense, because she doesn't outwit him through suddenly developing male-coded hypercompetence. She survives because he suddenly becomes incredibly incompetent when it comes to her.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting, because I think probably whilst watching it, I'd sort of put my brain into a kind of gear of, well, this is the moment where he's got to kind of fuck up, or she gets killed. However, to lash that to intention, that's really interesting. That opens up an even further texture. I like that, not only because I want to iron out what might seem a deficiency on a superficial viewing, but actually it does make a kind of sense, because she does not fulfill the model the other victims.
This is exactly it. She's not sexualized in his eyes. She hasn't at any point been like naked or declothed. She's never had sex in front of him. So suddenly that
but he does have a strange fascination with her, doesn't he? Because he not only sees her first through the, as you say, the two windows of the old house, which are like that, but then he specifically follows her in the first instances, doesn't he?
Yes,
her
she's
garden,
she's his main target of interest. It's because seeing everything as he does through the ideological lens of misogynistic patriarchy, we know different because we've been with Laurie on her own. We've seen the complexity of her characterization. He sees the girl in the slightly frumpy clothes who carries lots of books and looks well behaved and more modestly dressed compared to the other girls, and he interprets her as the good one. That's
the one who should have. He's the one that's the one who should have babysat his sister.
Yeah, she's the one that he doesn't fancy. Therefore, she's the one that he doesn't want to kill. What he wants to do is play with her. That's what it's like at the end. It's like infantile rough play. It's like it's his version of roughhousing. The only way that he has to interact with anybody is through violence. So he has to interact with her through violence, but because he doesn't actually want to kill her, it's this kind of pantomimic violence where the worst he can do is scratch her arm a bit and things like that.
Through that lens, it does work. He hides behind the sofa at one point, doesn't he? Sort of leaps out at her, in a slightly almost brotherly way.
He does a play dead.
He wants to be the little brother on Halloween being babysat by the sister, and instead of upstairs with the boy, she's playing hide and seek with him downstairs.
Yes, that really works, actually.
She even goes and hides in a cupboard. And when he's trying to break into the cupboard, he's not trying to kill her. He's saying, "Found you."
Yeah.
And of course, he's got one serious problem for a while, which is she's with the wrong boy. She's babysitting the wrong boy. So he has to lure her away. He has to lure her away from the other boy. I think that's a cracking reading because
I think that's a brilliant interpretation. It so works.
It also helps rewire, if you like, the feeling I had of, he's had to slightly become inept here. But of course, I was looking at it through the well, yes, I mean, she's the final girl, and because we've got all these, as you say, orthodoxies, which some of them are post-priory as well. So that's a really fascinating view.
I don't claim that any of this is in any way authorial intent. I don't claim that anybody was doing this deliberately.
Very interesting.
But
I'm just saying that this is how you make sense of what you see on screen.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very interesting.
It really does recontextualize a lot of those later scenes, though, and makes them work in a very interesting way. I like that. Because
he does that thing as well, doesn't he? He plays dead and then sits up suddenly, and it is very childlike. It's not. He doesn't sit up in a creepy way or a stealthy way. He just sits up.
Again, I mean, that's one of those moments where when you as the audience realize something supernatural is happening, right?
Yeah.
Because no human being can survive that. What he's been through at that point. I mean, what's happened to him? He's been stabbed in the neck. He's been stabbed in the eye. Yeah. He's been stabbed quite aggressively in the belly, and he's still moving around.
Yeah, and he's not bleeding.
No, he's not bleeding. Right.
Even when they reveal the eye, there is a mark, but there's no blood.
Yeah. Ideas don't bleed, right?
No, ideas don't bleed.
Don't bleed.
And I think the film is conscious of this. And I think that the thing that gives that away is the moment where Michael, and again, it's a kind of play, although of course he does kill this girl. He goes upstairs with a sheet draped over him, with eye holes in it. It's his Halloween costume, and he's pretending. What's he pretending to be? He's pretending to be a ghost.
Of course, it's trick or treat. It's the season of trick or treat. It's the day of tricks.
Yeah,
and that's of course he's going to have that.
But the disguise is, of course, always a kind of revelation. By choosing how to disguise yourself, you reveal something about yourself. So he's revealing something
within the parameters set by Halloween. That's the thing, isn't it? He operates within
those parameters. He is a creature of Halloween. He is
Halloween
a creature of that.
Is very playful. It is about tricks and treats.
It's about play and performance and pretense. Yeah. But it's also about exactly that blurring of boundaries between the material world and the spectral world, the world of the past, the world of the future, the world of the ancestors, and the world of the living. That's what it's about. It's the blurring of those lines.
The robbing of the
gravestone
is another example of that, as well as the wearing of the sheet and the glasses of the boyfriend. Which, I mean, that's a particularly macabre joke.
It's that. I mean, that does
it's the glasses.
Playful side, doesn't it? The fact that he's bothered to put the boyfriend's glasses on is a kind of macabre joke.
And he's
fundamentally this gigantic man-child, so he can't carry the pretense. He just stands there. She talks to him, and he has no idea how do you be a grown-up boy like the boy I killed. I'm under the sheet and I'm hidden. I've got his glasses on. That's the best I can do. He has no idea how to be a grown-up male. He's this eternal frozen child.
Of course, it's significant that he ultimately strangles her with the phone. I mean, that's what his sister was doing when he stabbed her. She was talking on the phone, not paying attention to him.
Exactly.
But it's also taking away her voice, right?
Yes. Yeah.
She's the one that he thinks is his sister. If he thinks anybody's his sister, it's her. Yeah. He doesn't think Laurie's his sister. He thinks Laurie's the good version of his sister, the person his sister should have been. Right.
Because that whole sequence is such an echo of the opening sequence anyway, because the boyfriend is there and then the boyfriend goes downstairs and so on. I wonder if this in a way is timely for us to talk about Lumis, because one of the things is we've got with Michael is that after that first killing, he shuts down or goes into a dormant state for 15 years before he repeats the cycle. And now this all happens off screen, and of course even the sequences that Carpenter shot he then cut, so you've got 15 years where suddenly the influence is Lumis. Now I think this is where things get very interesting as well, so I just thought if we're good to talk a bit about Lumis at this point, at this juncture.
Oh, absolutely.
I think Dr. Loomis is a complete asshole. I'm with the nurse at the start because she's withering in her scorn for him. What a bad doctor.
What a bad doctor. I mean, he is more like, he occupies a role that's closer to the priest in an Exorcist film, doesn't he? Like the language he uses. His dynamic is that of like a spiritual leader or a fundamentalist, right?
And
just about to say exactly that. Like he's a conservative religious fanatic.
Yeah, and he also acts like a stalker. He goes around frightening children. He hangs around places explicitly.
Absolutely, and finds it rather amusing, right? I mean, that's Donald Pleasance's performance. He laughs after, but he finds some gallows humor in it.
But it's. I mean, I guess again because it's an American text, and this is so much more firmly embedded in American culture, really. It's very easy to sort of see Lumis as being superficially a kind of Ahab figure, because I say that's deeply embedded in that culture. Obviously, this is the rug is pulled from under our feet somewhat, but he's no kind. I mean, it's interesting to see him at the end, I think, coming to the rescue of Laurie, because he is no kind of rescuer at all. He may be the very authority figure that has even gestated this evil, because I love that moment where he says it took him however X many years to reach Michael, and then the rest trying to ensure he wasn't released. Is Lumis the problem here? I mean, we know that something happened at the beginning. We know that there was but I think the film plays this lovely trick of either he's uncovered a greater evil, or he is someone who's reinforced something and Pleasance, because he's Pleasance, certainly plays him as borderline unhinged, because he's very good at creepy and he's very good at doing paranoid and obsessed. So you're left with this thing of what the hell happened for 15 years, and what made and why 15 years as the catalyst, or the interval rather, before returning to Haddonfield and go, what?
It reminds me of that bit in the Dark Knight Returns where the Joker has just been sat basically aphasic and in a coma and completely unresponsive for years and years and years, and then Batman comes out of retirement and the Joker wakes up and smiles. 15 years is how long it takes a girl to become a teenage girl. So Laurie is now,
I say, that's the point. That's the cycle, right? There are new teenagers, there are new teenage girls about in Haddonfield. So
yes, that would make sense. Yeah, of course. With
Lumis, it's a chicken and egg argument, isn't it? I mean, you get the impression of Lumis as someone who's in mourning for his ideology, which you assume to be psychology, right? At this point, his rationality is gone, and you have to wonder: is it because he saw this thing in Michael and he realized that it was, as he puts it, right, sort of like elemental evil, which is not the language of psychology. It's not the language of rationality of any kind. So is he in mourning for that? Or was he that to begin with, and he sort of inculcated that in Michael?
I mean,
it's hard to say.
This could be the story of a fuck up psychiatrist who created the problem or worsened the problem.
Yes, I know there are numerous remakes of this already, and they're all terrible. But if you were going to rewrite the story, that would possibly be an interesting way to take it.
Yeah.
Lumis is the only teacher that Michael has from the age of, I don't know what age he is at the start of the film, 8 or something like that.
Yeah.
He's the only teacher that Michael has known throughout his late youth, his adolescence. He's taught Michael. If anybody has taught Michael anything, it can only be Lumis. And Lumis isn't,
Sam Lumis.
Except in formal terms, yes, he's a psychiatrist, but from every other thing about him, how he talks, his worldview, etc., he's a blood and thunder, cruel, vengeful, good old style American Christian moralist.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. To the point whereby he is stalking his former patient in order to kill him.
Yeah.
You know, this is not a good guy. This is not a good man by any stretch or measure.
And it's highlighted by the bit where the sheriff tries to do the sort of the stereotypical Law and Order thing where he says, "God damn you for letting him go." And of course it doesn't make any sense because Lumis didn't let him go. Lumis wanted him locked up forever.
Absolutely.
Lumis is on your side. You're talking to your ideological confederate, not one of these bleeding heart liberals that wants to let maniacs out of the asylum and give them a government-sponsored knife to go and kill people. Yeah. You've got it the wrong way around, Sheriff.
With his government-sponsored car that he's stolen.
And funnily enough, I mean, within the metaphysics that the film sets up, he is kind of right too. I mean, the shape is elemental evil. It is mythological evil. Whatever's inside Michael, whatever's driving him, it is a kind of evil. And it's interesting that it is a kind of patriarchy as a demonic force when you have that countered by Lumis, who is also part of that system.
Lumis is part of the same thing. Yeah. Lumis doesn't realize it in the same way that Michael isn't conscious of what he's doing at the start of the film. Lumis isn't conscious of it either.
Which is why he's impotent, of course. Even when he shoots Michael and he falls off the second story balcony, he's still alive. He disappears. He's still around. You can't kill it like that. It doesn't work like that.
Yes, indeed.
But no, I mean, I just love Lumis. I love Donald Pleasance's performance. I think he's frigging amazing in this film.
He's closer to what he plays in
something
Prince of Darkness than it is to what he played.
There's a lot of overlap, isn't there, between the two characters? Yeah. I mean, like in Prince of Darkness, you have this character who's in mourning for his ideology and for his assumptions of what reality is.
Well, all doctrine that he's imbibed has been proven to have been a cheat in Prince of Darkness.
But I think the character in Prince of Darkness has made a breakthrough and is now moving in the right direction.
Yes,
I don't think
Lumis has gone off the deep end, basically.
Yeah. I learned something recently. Apparently, Michael Reeves wanted Pleasance to be Matthew Hopkins in Witchfinder General. Apparently, he wrote the part for Pleasance, and he had to have Vincent Price instead. Yeah. And I don't like that movie, but I think Price is good in it. But I do have to say, I wish we had that movie with Donald Pleasance because I think
I would have loved
that would be amazing.
I'm sure you know about the stuff that Price had to put up with on that movie, because I don't think it's good practice. I mean, it leads us back to things like Kubrick and Shelley Duvall and things like that. But it did in this particular case. I still don't condone it. Pushed Price to a certain kind of performance because he basically got on the set and the guy the director went, I didn't want you. You were the last person I wanted. I don't want you here. And basically dogged it throughout the entire film. But Price did say at the end, and I hate this kind of outcome because I want to pour cold water on this kind of story every time. But, it's one of those exceptions that proves the rule, I wonder. But Price did say, okay, to be fair, I went at this in a way that I haven't gone at a roll in years. And I agree with you, Jack. It's a very tough watch, that movie. And but he is he's very good in it, considering he carries all that baggage of what Vincent Price is meant to be and what he is meant to convey, and so on. And
I would love to see Donald Pleasance's version of Matthew Hopkins.
The alternate universe where they got Pleasance would have been that's perfect role and actor, isn't it? It's just a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah. And it's weird how it ends up in the folk horror trilogy, actually. The loosely, because it's not really a folk horror. It's a curious movie. I mean, it's
ideologically, it's almost like the counter to folk horror, isn't it?
Yeah. But they always sort of throw it in with Blood on Satan's Claw and Wicker Man as being part of that.
I find that very odd. I do find that rather strange. It doesn't work for me. That.
It's not.
I mean, it's horror in more or less the same way that things like Hostel are horror, in that it depicts horrifying suffering. It's not really horror in any wider sense than that.
No, and it relishes it as well. It really loves its violence. That film loves it.
Nihilism just absolutely pours off it, doesn't it?
I mean, to be fair, if you are going to make a film about Matthew Hopkins, then nihilism is part and parcel, because he was a cynical arsehole. But
I mean, I have to say, if one other thing it did, about people who are casting things and you think, oh, that's interesting, because that shouldn't work. I mean, it got a very interesting performance out of Ian Ogilvy, who was just really a kind of soft personality actor, really, sort of Roger Moore light. And he's actually very good in those last sequences.
Roger Moore light.
Yeah, right. So what is that?
I mean, that's like incandescent, isn't it?
That's very light.
That's like a feather. Poor Sir Rog. I've got a lot of love for Sir Rog, but even he must have been able to go to sleep at night and go, well, at least I'm not Ian Ogilvy.
Bless. Oh dear.
Yeah, but he kind of falls. Ian Ogilvy sort of falls into that similar thing of there's a sort of cluster of British actors around of that generation. Another one's Martin Jarvis, and you think they're just all so wet. Awful, but at least Ian Ogilvy got pushed on that movie because he's actually very good in that final sequence. He genuinely looks harrowed. But
well, I suppose, like, if you've got to stand up to Vincent Price and anything, you've got to turn it on, don't you? You've really got to. Otherwise, you're going to get overshadowed completely.
He still could have screwed it up, but he is actually very good in those last sequences. And you think, well, there you go.
The thing with Matthew Hopkins is, but anything that ever involves in any drama, any film, they always cast too old. They always cast too old. He was 25 when he died.
Yeah. I made the same point when I was doing Sherlock, and of course I was reminded they lived a lot harder and faster in those times. Like, that's true. Oh, yeah. There was more disease.
There was the constant smack usage as well. That's gonna do something to your complexion.
Yeah.
But it goes back to that. I think we mentioned it maybe on our first sequence, particularly pertaining to films in the 70s, because it was that period when all the codes were relaxed, and you do from about 68 through, and I'm thinking of The Witchfinder General amongst many, through to where, I mean, my God, the gloves are off. And even now you can watch certain films from that period and you're like, wow, this is, because I think the thing is about, you mentioned Hostel earlier, Jack, and other things like the torture porn subgenre and everything, they still have a certain 21st century gloss on them.
Yeah,
they still have that digital patina. Whereas you go back to some of these films from the 70s, and boy, I do them rarely because there are several which they're grueling.
They're grim. Yeah, they're really. Something about
wow, this is a fascinating pop cultural moment, because these films, the gloves that they were able to take, a lot of directors were able to take their gloves off, and they really pushed.
And they really did, right? It's not just the subject matter; it's the style of filming as well, isn't it? It's the nature of cinematography of the era that makes it
filthy film stock, and
Yes, that's the a huge part of it. I mean, the medium is the message, as we know, and just the texture, the physical texture of film. It has a meaning in itself. It imports meaning just all by itself.
Yeah, definitely. And again,
it's funny. You mentioned the sort of the famous folk horror trilogy. You know, Witchfinder General, Wicker Man, and Blood on Satan's Claw. Blood on Satan's Claw is I love that movie. It's a fantastic movie. But for me, it's kind of a limit case. The rape scene in that is about my limit. I can just about put up with that because the film as a whole is doing stuff that I think is worthwhile, and it makes that. Arguably justifiable, but in terms of what I personally can stomach watching, that's about as far as I can go. I cannot actually get through Witchfinder General when there is the particular execution scene where the woman is lowered into the pyre. I cannot handle it. I can't watch it. I can't get past it. I can't do it.
And one thing I've often found about Blood on Satan's Claw is one of the things that is often pilloried about it is the end, and yet there's something about that ending I rather love, about the fact that it is this pathetic puppet, because it is something that's been manifested by the children, and in turn what they've done has been manifested. So the idea of it being a pathetic, which an authority figure brings down with just I rather like that ending. And I know it gets often criticized and ridiculed, and say no, it works far better as this obviously pathetic, almost like a scarecrow.
Yeah,
I love that ending. Yeah, but it's a very peculiar film, very oddly disjointed film, and as you say, there's parts of it where it was 3 films in one.
The making of it was a total shambles. The reason it's so disjointed is because it was meant to be a portmanteau film. The original script was like 3 separate stories which were all set in and around this village round about the same period in history, and then almost at the very last minute somebody said, no, we're not going to make a portmanteau movie, we're going to integrate all these 3 separate stories into one narrative, and that's why it's the way it is. But again, that is part of why it has this. I mean, there's nothing else like that.
Agree.
We said this about Prince of Darkness. There's just something about Prince of Darkness that is completely unique. There is no other film that is quite like Prince of Darkness, and I think you can say the same thing about Blood on Satan's Claw as well, and that's part of why.
All 3 of them, to be perfectly honest, and all 3 of them are troubleshoots as well. I mean, the Wicker Man, famously. I mean, my God, the making of the Wicker Man is legendary, absolutely legendary. Largely thanks to Christopher Lee, who wouldn't shut up about it.
Well, he was very proud of it, bless him.
He was, wasn't he? He still said at the very end of his life and the end of his career, it was still the best thing he'd ever done. Maybe barring the Lord of the Rings, which he also loved.
Yeah.
And he's very
proud of a terrible movie that he made where he played Jinnah, the Muslim political leader.
And that was quite late on as well, wasn't it? I mean,
it was very late on.
But at a point where really that shouldn't have been happening.
Yeah, maybe should have known
if that
better.
film was made in the 70s, you could go, okay, it's the 70s.
His agent probably should have said, Chris, no.
Yeah.
It's a bad film. But I think Lee was just flattered by the idea of being asked to play this very important, serious political figure in a big, important, political, serious drama. And, I understand. I get that. I understand why he felt that way.
Well, having watched interviews with him, I get the impression that's how you did it with Christopher Lee. You had to sort of swell the character, puff the character up a little bit, and give him something to latch on to.
Oh, he's ludicrously vain. I mean, or was ludicrously vain. I mean, it almost to a pantomime level. I mean, it's quite funny. I mean, I think he had a great deal to be vain about, but yes, he was,
I mean, I agree. And yet the strange thing about that, I've always thought this about Christopher Lee, the strange thing about him is that he's a very generous performer.
Yes.
And I think it's maybe a side effect of him being so huge, because he was like 7'4" or something like that. And he had that face and he had that voice, Yes. And I think he learned quite early on that if he was ever going to get anywhere in performance, he just had to kind of draw back a bit and let other people have space on the stage or on the screen. And it leads... If you look at his performances in things like The Skull, which is one of my favorite movies, or a piece of absolute garbage like Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, where he gives a completely serious down the line performance as this nasty art critic and stuff like that. He and I think Lord of the Rings as well. He's he allows the other performer to be in front. He lets Ian McKellen, he lets Peter Cushing, he lets whoever he's working with just be in front.
I mean, his professionalism is definitely beyond question, because I mean, I saw interviews with him, and he was very, very strong. I mean, it's very much, it was in his ethic as well. I mean, he was politically and everything. I mean, he's far removed from anything that I could identify with. But I know someone who did a photo shoot with him and said there was nothing that you wouldn't expect. He was really like that, and it was very a very unsettling man, because of the strength of that personality and that stillness, and you felt nervous around him. Not just his sheer size, but the power of his personality, of not saying or doing much, and then suddenly it would absolutely bend over backwards for whatever it was you needed to do professionally in that moment, would do anything. And then when the sense of humor emerged, it was startling, because he presented an image of such earnestness and really and then suddenly to laugh about something absurd.
He was actually a very serious-minded man.
Yes, very,
and it comes through. He and I think that's why he wanted to do good stuff. He wanted to do quality stuff, and I think he did spend a lot of his career. He had a great career as an actor. He was always in demand, or at least he was for a very long time. But he spent a lot of it doing stuff that wouldn't have been his first choice of material.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
I mean, he wanted to be making adaptations of Tolstoy, didn't he? I mean, that's what he wanted.
That's exactly what he was.
He was on a deep level. He was one of us. He was a geek. This was a guy who was into Lord of the Rings and Dracula and Sherlock Holmes, and he was one of us on a deep level.
Absolutely, he was. I mean, he was one of those people who had read the Lord of the Rings once a year, every year since the age of
cut a heavy metal album seriously, not ironically.
When he was in his 80s,
the vocal of a heavy metal album, and he did it properly. But it also that immense disappointment as well, which I always feel. As you said, Jack, enormous generosity and everything, but the immense disappointment at, I'm not going to be Gandalf.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I'm going to be Saruman.
So wanted to be Gandalf.
Because that was
just not right.
His own life
for Gandalf, is it?
No, but I think Peter Jackson probably handled it rather well, actually, to say, well, there's an awful lot of times where Gandalf is needed on set, and we have to be, but you're right, George, but at the same time, it's like he was waiting his whole life.
From watching Christopher Lee's interviews on those DVDs, I think he told him, well, Saruman is the first of the Astari. Saruman the White is the Lord of the Astari. Yeah. He is the highest wizard of Middle-earth. He's the most powerful. He's the most intelligent. So that's why we're getting used to playing Saruman.
But
that's why you're playing
still
Saruman.
This wonderful, because people can change multitudes and all that. There's still that lovely image that you can conjure of him and Peter Cushing sneaking off to cinemas in Soho to watch Looney Tunes.
And doing impressions of them. I mean, my God!
Peter Cushing, who was so gleeful and childlike in
sweet
in his life, and
yeah.
Sweet, and yes, he said, there's a wonderful interview with him where I found it on YouTube once, and the interview, the telephone rings in his house. There's an interview, and it is Christopher Lee on the line, but we don't know this. And Peter Cushing picks up his old dial telephone and hello, and then starts absolutely beside him, cackling and wheezing, because on the other end is Christopher Lee, who's begun the conversation as Daffy Duck. That's how he would speak to him.
And isn't it perfect, by the way, that Cushing is Bugs and Christopher Lee is Daffy?
Yeah, what's going on there?
I mean, yeah. That just says it all, doesn't it?
It really
does. Because Bugs is a smart ass, but he's fundamentally not a bad guy. Daffy is an asshole,
Yeah. Oh my God.
And we all love an asshole, because Daffy was my favourite.
Chappie was my favourite too.
One of the things involving Christopher Lee that makes me laugh the most is on the there is a commentary on the Wicker Man DVD, which is it's him and Edward Woodward talking over, giving cast commentary over the film, and it's Mark Commode is also with them, and Edward Woodward is so familiar with Christopher Lee, he keeps calling him Chris, and it's frigging hilarious. It's just wonderful. It's the most hilarious thing. He's so not a Chris, is he?
No.
He's a Sir Christopher, right? A Mr. Lee, perhaps, you know. Oh my goodness.
And definitely one of those people who had, you know, one of those lives where always coming into contact with kind of choke points in history or historical figures. Or
it's absurd, isn't it? It's
absurd.
When you
had like about 20 lives of normal. Of a normal man,
it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd, the stuff that he's done and the people he's met and whatnot. The authors whose work he featured in adaptations of, and he met them.
Yeah.
He knew them personally. It's like, for God's sake, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Tolkien, Pete, you know,
who held him as a baby. Indeed.
Absolutely absurd, right?
I'm feeling very well disposed towards Christopher Lee at the moment, because every Christmas I watch the 4 ghost stories for Christmas that he made in the year 2000 for the BBC, for BBC Scotland, where he plays M.R. James, and he verbally, you know, he plays it like he's M.R. James in the college, King's College, Cambridge, telling one of his stories to a group of young undergraduates, you know, at the college, and it's just him sat in a chair doing M.R. James's text, edited down and with background music and little inserts they've shot. But that's basically all it is. It's 4 episodes, and they just do 4 half hours. Christopher Lee dressed up as M.R. James doing the text of 4 M.R. James stories, and it's absolutely sublime. Firstly, it's the best adaptation for screen of any M.R. James, the best by a mile. Yeah. And the performance is amazing. He is amazing in those. Wow. And I love them so much, and I watch them every Christmas. So I'm full of sort of warm feelings towards it.
Yeah.
I do love the idea of Christopher Lee playing a gay character, a gay guy. I think that's brilliant. Yeah. Did something in me that just that bubbles up at that. I think that's wonderful. Speaking of,
he doesn't look remotely like M.R. James, of course.
No, he does not. He bloody does not. No, he absolutely doesn't. But speaking of those adaptations, we all saw the one over this Christmas, right?
I didn't.
What was going on there?
My God, that was bad.
Because I sort of knew it was going to be bad.
It wasn't even, for me, it wasn't even that it was bad. It was the fact that it was homophobic.
Yeah.
Like,
I remember reading about this.
I could not wrap my head around it. I could not wrap my head around the queer coding of the villain character. You know, I just could not. I couldn't. From a gay writer and a gay creator as well, I'm like, what are you doing? Because that's not in the text, Steve. It's not in the text. If it was in the text,
in fact, he's specifically heterosexual in the text, because part of one of the things Gatiss removes is that Bellingham is engaged to be married to the sister of one of the other characters, and he just takes that out completely.
He turns him into
makes him into this outrageous sort of camp queer villain stereotype. And really, we're still doing this in 2023?
Wow,
seriously?
It was odd. It was really strange. It was also a bad adaptation. It just didn't work. But
I mean, the only thing that kept me in some of the more recent, well, they're not recent any longer, they're 20 years old, because again, it comes down to that thing that we were talking about, you know, the medium is the message, about the particular, I mean, I think some of the 70s ghost stories of Christmas, the M.R. James stories and the Dickens one, Signalman, some of them are over literal. I mean, the classic example is the ash tree, although I think the text is over literal in the wrong direction, but really the only thing that made me watch the later ones was in a way the presence of David Burke, who was in about 2 or 3 of them, because he's a sort of link to that earlier time, really, of television actors and so on, and theatre actors. And
well, the first one they did of the new ones back in 2005, A View from a Hill, that's not Gatiss. It's written by Peter Harness.
It's Peter
Harness,
and
it's directed by somebody else. And it's a fantastic half hour of television. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Again, all
the subsequent ones have been bad.
Yeah.
The
Room 13, that wasn't particularly great, although it did have David Burke in it. But yes, the Hill was
kind of diverting, but not good, you know.
Yeah, it's just. I mean,
I'm really interested in those 70s adaptations. I'm going to write about them. I'm going to write about the text and the adaptations because I have a lot of affection for them, but there are fundamental ways in which they just fail to convey what it is about the original story.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's kind of not their fault because there's something unfilmable about the original stories, about the central thing.
Yeah. Why would you ever?
That's probably the best of them, I think.
It's good. It's really good. But why would... I mean, that text is so hard to put on screen. It's so hard to make fly on screen. I don't know why you would do it. It is really scary. I mean, those kids are terrifying.
Yeah.
But I think
that's my favorite of the old adaptations, but it still doesn't get at the story, at the central power of the story, because there's just something in the way M.R. James, I'm going to write about this. There's something in the way M.R. James writes that is just not translatable to screen.
Absolutely, because it's about the attempt at trying to do something.
It's about touch and texture and things like that.
Disappearance and an appearance. I mean, how would you do that? How would you do it?
How would you do that?
I mean, it's just the power is in the how
it's conceptual.
All over the place it is. You don't know where you are, and you don't know what's happening. You don't know who's happening to who, but you know something deeply uncanny is happening, and you have a kind of gist of it. But there's a few like that. Which are what's the one where crumbs names it? The fella he's like got a drawing of a hole. Or he finds a hole in a
It's Mr. Humphrey's Inheritance. That actually was an ITV one.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that
was an ITV one, not a BBC one.
God, how the hell did they do that?
And so it's different. Because we've talked about this as well. The BBC Gothic from the long 70s is completely unique. Even comparable productions from ITV from the same period are different on some sort of fundamental quantum level.
You can tell if you're watching them in sequence, say on YouTube or whatever, as I tend to do around sort of autumn, Christmas time. When you reach that one, there is this massive tonal shift. The whole thing, like the aesthetics, the style of filming, everything is different.
Right, I've never seen that. Now that's interesting. I didn't know that one because my first thought would be you can't do that. You can't possibly adapt that one among several. But
and you can't. Funnily enough, you can't. It doesn't necessarily work, and they do change quite a lot to make it kind of work.
Yeah. And some
we seem to have.
Sorry, yes. I was just to wrap up this little rabbit.
The audience don't mind. I've been told by many that they love the diversion, so it's fine.
The sheer.
Well, that's lucky, really, isn't it? So
it's a good thing, really, isn't it? It's our brand now, so it's fine.
The abilities of a single actor as well, because I mean, one of the ones that I do enjoy very much, but it's largely because of the performance of the actors that is a warning to the curious, but that's because of Peter Vaughan.
Yeah,
I think what he manages to convey an extraordinary.
That one always strikes me with how violent it is.
Yes,
I mean, you don't see anything.
There are two,
but the implied violence is horrible. It's so brutal. You know, you see the Phantom with the bludgeoning instrument cracking away behind the hill there. And you know that's coming down on the character's head. You know, it's like,
But he's got...
it's the implied violence of the scene in the hotel room where Paxton discovers the book sliced to pieces with the open razor blade as well.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, not nice.
I think it's...
Peter... That has Peter Vaughan, and it has an amazing musical score.
Yes.
And it's good in its... Like a lot of them, it's good in its own right. But it completely fails to capture what it is about the original story, because the thing about the ghost in the original story is that you don't see him except just you're conscious of him in the corner of your eye, in your peripheral vision, and then you turn and he's not there. How do you film that? You can't. So in the TV version, they have to show you the ghost as a figure running at you, and okay, that's fine. That they make that sinister, but it's not M.R. James.
Same. No, it's not the same. They try really hard, don't they? They try like lots of tricks with the camera to just make it like fleeting and distant, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
As I say, I'm going to embark on my long-promised series of essays about M.R. James and his adaptations, so I'm going to be writing about
I love them. I love all of those adaptations.
Oh, me too.
As broad as they are, I love them all. I think they've got a real ethos about them. There's there's a feeling about them, an X factor, which I really, really love. But you are right. As adaptations of the stories, they largely don't really work.
No.
But that's why those Christopher Lee readings are the best screen adaptations, because they find a way of putting it on screen while keeping M.R. James' words. And really, those stories, the power, and this is true of all great ghost stories, the power comes down to one or two key conjunctions of words.
Yes,
just
one of the
a couple of words here and there.
I think it's often a failing with writers, but it's a strength with M.R. James. Is even now I've reread James's short stories for years, but if I come to a point, say around Samhain, around Halloween and on, where I pick them up again, the amount of times you have to reread a sequence, and that's his strength.
Yeah,
because you think I don't know where I am. It's a wonderful feeling with M.R. James. This is not, we're not talking about a crap writer leaving you lost. We're talking about someone who's put you in such an uncanny space where so much meaning is broken down, or literal meaning is broken down. You have to go back over it.
Yeah, it's that sense of dislocation, isn't it, that he cultivates, which is so much like, in its own peculiar way, it's akin to writers like Lovecraft, but more elegant.
Or an image.
He's so
intrudes.
I love Lovecraft, but M.R. James is so much. When he's on form, he's such a better writer than Lovecraft.
Because I think that the greatness of James is that he finds an image that intrudes on another image, and you as a reader, you suddenly lose all orientation. You don't know what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right. Whereas with Lovecraft, he sort of sets you up right from the beginning that you are going to go into uncanny. But with James, it's sudden, and he does it without fanfare as well. These things happen, and you're scrambled by them. You think, well, how can that possibly? And how does that work geographically, or how does that work and then it starts to slowly fall into place, but never quite fully. That's part of their strength.
Well, some of his best stories, I consciously copied this when I wrote Calder's Room. You can't quite make sense of what's happening. You know that something's happening, and you get a vague sense of the mechanics of it, but you can't actually map it out. Like my absolute favorite of all of them is The Stalls of Barchester Cathedral, and you get a framework of events, and you know broadly and in sort of broad strokes what's going on under the surface in terms of what the central character has done and what's happening to him, but you couldn't actually sort of write it out. You can't from the text. You can't explain what happened, and that is so powerful.
It's really clever. It's something that M.R. James does beautifully. The stories themselves, the plots, are actually quite simple. They're quite simple gothic ghost stories. When you remove the language from them, you just look at the narrative thread that's happening. But then it's the feeling, it's the ethos, it's the experience of them, which is so uncanny and so disorienting.
Very simple plots, such as something like The Haunted Doll's House, for example, and yet you start digging deeper into that story, and for us now, the idea of haunted dolls, or it's become so, it's cliche.
It's almost for me, it's an immediate turn off. It's like I'm so not interested. But the
wonderful thing about that story is it's not really about that. The real horror is this sudden image of the children running from the house, and you don't really know why.
In the house.
Yes, it's the family. You don't know why the children are. You do know, but it's not explicit.
Wider implications.
You don't know exactly.
So suddenly the haunted doll aspect of it, that's not important. That's just your framework. That's your scary story framework. Actually, something that's far horrifying.
He has these key things that his stories, his best stories anyway, are always situated in history, in material history, very often to do with the history of the church and the Reformation and the contest between Catholicism and Protestantism and its long-term historical effects. He's very interested in submerged, abusive psychological dynamics between and within families. He's an intensely sensual writer. This is the key thing. This is why the stories do not really translate to cinematic narrative adaptation, because the key moment of horror in so many of the stories is a moment of is a moment of sensation. There's a moment of physical sensation that you just can't film it without depicting it literally. And the other thing he has that really sets him apart from almost all his contemporaries and near contemporaries and precursors, with the notable exception of Lefanu, J. Sheridan Lefanu, is that he is very interested in evil and cruelty and wrath and malevolence. He says this in his own writings about his own writings. He says, "I'm not interested in ghosts that are helpful or just neutral. I think a ghost story should be about evil. It should be about something that means you ill." And that is something that is strangely absent from uncanny literature from the Victorian and Edwardian era. If you look at it, loads of it is really kind of sentimental and innocuous. And James is interested in grudges and curses and wrath and rage and hatred and cruelty and sadism, and it's all, and it works so powerfully. Yeah, elemental evil, exactly. But always, as I say, rooted in material dynamics between people, and always just hinted at. So it's never splurged all over the page.
No, not at all. No.
Wow, that's made me want to go and reread. I haven't read his short stories for ages, but I do want to now.
Oh, that was great.
The good ones are unparalleled. I think. Yeah.
And I guess in a rather clunky way, we can say that the strength of the movie that we discussed initially is in those imponderables, is in those sensations. Although this is a work of cinema, it is not an adaptation of a book. Carpenter gets us as close as they are to sensation in many scenes.
Although there are book adaptations of the film from contemporaneously, and they're awful. I did read them when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned this in previous episodes, that they go into a kind of a mythology that I thought it sounded quite interesting. They make Michael part of a cult of of Samhain cultists or pagan cultists or something.
It's like there's something about his family being like the latest in a long line of some druidic tradition or something to that effect, and every so many generations a boy child is marked.
I mean, I will say the end of the fourth film.
That kind of appeals in principle, anyway.
It's just not that. It's just not well done, unfortunately.
No,
is one of the better moments from the post-first movie, which is because it links to the first movie, which is there is another sister, and she's young, and they try and set up he's going after the younger sister. I think she's about 10 or 11.
Yeah, she's she's a little older than Michael was when he was possessed.
But there's a very good image at the end, where Michael has been vanquished, the girl has been saved. It's all very formulaic and rubbish, and they put her to bed, and she comes out of her bedroom because she's frightened. Yeah. And she stands at the top of the staircase, and the parents look up, and the reaction on their face, because she's wearing little Michael's outfit from the first film with the little mask. That is a frightening moment.
It's really good. It recreates that. That is one of the only good sequences in sequels.
That's it.
It recreates the opening sequence from this film.
Yeah.
It looks like the film looks like it's finished. It looks like it's done. Michael has been vanquished and so on and so forth. He's killed by like a conglomerate of the Haddonfield men, isn't he? He's shot and burned. And he falls down like a mine shaft or something like that. But He's done. He's finished now. That's it. He is categorically gone. But the girl that he was been stalking throughout the entire film, she waked up, and it suddenly it's that POV shot again. And suddenly she's picking up the mask, her clown mask that she's got from her Halloween costume. And I think she ends up killing her mother, if I remember correctly, with a pair of scissors in the bath or something like that.
Just because it's...
And you see...
I do remember that.
See, I think it's Lumis, actually, who comes up the stairs and he sees her doing that Michael thing with the scissors in her hands and the mask on, and he just breaks down. He just breaks down. He collapses where he stands, and it's a really good performance from Donald Pleasance, who, bless his heart, has stuck with this franchise, up to this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course,
it's probably the best of the sequels. It's
4. Yeah. Yeah. As far as I remember, yes. Number 4.
It's fine. It's okay. It does.
If you need to delve into the wider story, that's probably the. I mean, I'm running on a 30-year memory, but
I do like the idea that what they're trying to do is, because at that point the Michael Myers character is really overplayed and so culturally prevalent that it's not scary anymore, of course, at all. So what they're trying to do is set up the next in line, which could have worked because she looks great. She is really quite disturbing when you get that shot of her on the landing. She really, in the clown costume with the scissors in hand, it is actually quite unsettling.
Yeah,
it could have worked.
Yeah.
But of course, then we went all H2O, and it became this silly sort of action horror thing, and it all became about Laurie Strode being like a badass and whatnot, and it's like, yeah.
I mean, it does kind of link to the other stuff we were talking about, because of course, you're reminding me of the Christopher Lee Dracula Hammer cycle, where Dracula keeps on being destroyed forever at the end of the movie, and then the next one he gets brought back, and then somewhere down the line, round about the 4th or 5th sequel, you think, oh, this might actually be an interesting direction of the future, and then the next one comes along and it's totally wasted it, and it's similar.
Yeah, it's such a shame, really, because there's legs here, isn't there? There is a wider mythology to sort of explore here that could have been really quite resonant and interesting as a series of films. Of course, the idea, one of the reasons they called it Halloween, is they had the notion during filming that they were going to do just a series of unrelated horror films.
Which that were going obviously becomes the one and only unrelated, doesn't it? Because that's the old Nigel Neal one about the Halloween masks, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. Which is actually it's quite an interesting film in and of itself. I kind of like Halloween 3. It's got a sort of hokey, slightly horror pantomime feeling about it.
Jingle that just. I mean, I'm unable to appreciate any of the good things about it because of that fucking advertising jingle that just gets played over and over. Oh God, I can't bear it.
It gets into your head and it doesn't let go. I'm afraid it's a bit of a worm, that one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a great meta commentary on consumerism and advertising. Okay,
still got to deal with it.
Well, that is actually, funnily enough, the themes of the film. That's exactly what it's about. The commercialization of Halloween. That's exactly what it's about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But and then of course later on we get the remakes and the Rob Zombie films, which are all about let's explore the backstory of Michael Myers. Let's ignore all of the
it's all the wrong direction, isn't it? I mean, exactly. This is what we were saying. There's no reason that this couldn't have spawned an interesting saga, but inevitably they want to talk about the things that, well, certainly the three of us find deeply uninteresting, where there is actually an untapped version of Halloween that they really could. I mean, Lumis is one. Tapping into Lumis more, and again, not to over-explain. We don't need a Lumis prequel or any shit like that, but just to try and just chase that down a little bit. But keep going towards the uncanny. Keep going towards the bits that don't make sense.
Yeah.
But it's that desire, isn't it? It's that desire to package up and simmer down and
it's also that highly aesthetic thing, isn't it? It's that, like, you've got people looking at what audiences respond to, and they're always looking at the superficial. They're looking at what they can market. So it's the image of Michael Myers, isn't it? That's what that's what
it. They
became responding to.
They become, and of all of them, he's the one it least works with. But certainly by the end of the 80s, when you had the three biggies were Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, they were the big three iconic, and then to a slightly lesser degree Pinhead, but Pinhead is out on a limb, really.
Definitely.
It's a very different kind of character, but even so, there was an attempt to drag Pinhead into the same milieu. But
it just doesn't work, does it? When
Michael Myers
with a character like
Pinhead, neither of them work in it. They don't. The other two, I mean, yeah, fine. But
the other two you can sort of get away with, because that's what they're designed for, isn't it? I mean,
they even end up fighting each other in one film, don't
yes,
they?
Of course. You go back and watch the original Friday the 13th now, and you know what? With all the sentiment in the world, it's not that great. It's not a brilliant film.
I think the second one's better than the first, isn't it?
Which is the one? Is it the Nightmare on Elm Street 3 that has this incredible queer subtext?
Second one.
Is that the second one?
That's two.
I like that one. I like that one for that very reason. I think that's kind of interesting and kind of brave for a film.
There's not many horror films where an invisible ghost whips a naked college boy with a wet towel in the shower. I mean,
it's true. It's true.
And explicitly says you have the body and I have the brain.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the lines in the film. Again, a film I've not seen since the 80s. That line sticks out. Because, I mean, there is your subtext. But it's not even a subtext. There is your text. It's
still not a good film, though. I'm sorry.
It's a dreadful film. I knew it was a dreadful film then.
I don't
even think the first one is a good film.
I have fun watching.
Great premise. Probably one of the best premise for a horror film.
Yeah.
And there has been, and they absolutely dropped the ball on it. Some good images in some films. I mean, even the
first film has amazing moments, but
I mean, the idea behind the third film is fantastic, but it does not. They do not execute it.
Yeah.
But the idea of, taking control of your own dreams and then becoming a fighting force to resist this entity, that sounds so fucking cool. But it's not in the screenplay. It's certainly not in the execution. But the first film's. It's exactly the same. It's that great premise, a few great moments, and then the frustration of it not pulling together.
Yeah,
the ideas are so much these things that shouldn't be. They shouldn't be expanded, because Nightmare on Elm Street has something similar going on to Halloween. It is essentially an urban legend. It's the creation of a world. It's a sick American urban legend. The idea of there was this murderer who lived on our street, and then all the parents in the street burned him alive in his house one day. But the thing is, he comes back in the dreams of their children. That's an amazing premise.
It's fantastic.
The moment you start expanding that or adding things to it or complicating it beyond that at all, you just dilute it.
Yeah. And in fact, actually,
where it stops working as that thing, as that urban legend, and that just makes it.
Candyman is the successful iteration of Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, it even shares its plot points. I mean, we discussed this at Candyman, even with the lead woman being put into an institution and so on. I mean, Hellbound does the same, but they are far better iteration. I mean, Candyman is what Nightmare on Elm Street should have been. But that film is the living proof that you can make these ideas work, but you get to express them, because
expansion
leads us back to Halloween. I mean,
there's no reason. There is absolutely no reason on earth these could not be good films. That there could not be good films made. I mean, Hellbound is probably one of the best examples. It's such a It's a stunner of a film. I mean,
and for Carpenter to get Halloween, and as you said, not something he was initially terribly enthusiastic. Well, he didn't want to make Black Christmas, basically, which was what he was being given, and yet even at this young age as well, which is
Black Christmas is actually quite good.
Yeah, but it was already there. Is my point. It was already there, and I think Carpenter was aware enough that it's like, I don't want to make something that's already there. But no, I agree with you. It is one of the good proto slasher thing, because it is one of the first, and therefore it's finding those things for the first time in an interesting way. He didn't want to make that, but he ends up making something very, very different.
Yeah, and I think it's just because it's him, isn't it? There is something about him as a director and as a creator. He is interested in what he does. He's interested in exploring ideas, even when he's making a film that is, in his own mind, kind of a stepping stone to a bigger career, to greater things. He's still he wants to make something resonant.
I mean, I love his chutzpah as well, because here is a young director.
Go on, please.
I was just saying, he's a young director who believes in himself enough that not only, I mean, he wants to make a Hitchcock movie here. I mean, even casts the Psycho's leading lady's daughter.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Sam Lumis is the name of Marion Crane's boyfriend in Psycho. But he's already starting on this thing of like, I'm a serious contender.
Exactly.
He did have good chutzpah, because one of the things he said to the investors was, I'll make it for X amount of I think it was $300,000 he made this film for, which is nothing. It's like even at the time that was a pittance. And people were saying to him, "You're mad."
Yeah, $300,000 made $70 million.
Right. You cannot make this film on that amount. You can make no film on that amount. It's just not going to work. And he said, "I will. I'll make this film. I'll deliver it on time, and I'll make this film on that budget." And that's the only reason they ponied up the dough.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if he's promising he's going to deliver as a film, and he can do it. For that amount of money, it doesn't even matter if it fails. The people obviously investing the money, that was like, well, whatever. Who cares? Even if he makes something terrible, we can still make our money back on that.
Yeah. And of course, that is the pattern for his career, because he has successes, he goes big. The bigger films flop, he has to go back small, and then he has to, although inevitably the films that flop find their way. We've talked about, obviously, how much video helped The Thing, but how much Big Trouble in Little China accrued interest after the event. I mean, again, it was much more successful on video than it had been in
huge on video. The Thing, obviously, The Thing was panned when it came out. Yeah, absolutely panned.
Which I rewatched at Christmas. Again, I sort of finished off our
totally a Christmas film. There's snow,
There's snow, for God's sake.
Snow.
But again, another film a film that I don't watch too often because I love it so much. And I realized it had been so long since I had seen it that I was in the blood test scene. I actually got the wrong person, and I was thrilled. I was thrilled because I thought, this is, how did I not? And I got the wrong guy. I was because I didn't say anything because Vicky hadn't seen it for a very long time either, and we sat there and I'm going, it's about to happen. It's not happened. It was the next guy.
Wrong guy.
It was the wrong guy. But I was thrilled. I thought that bit of information has left my memory. I left it long enough.
Fantastic.
That was great. I'm so pleased.
I mean, I love so many.
The Thing is also a Christmas movie because it's about a close-knit group of people who are forced to be in each other's company, and they really get on each other's nerves to the point where it causes huge arguments.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was Gary. I thought it was Donald Moffat's character, the station commander. I was thinking, and of course it's not. It's
which would have made sense, right? Because even McCready says, like, you're the only one who could have gotten to the blood supply.
The key and everything. But even that, I thought, yeah, it's a double bluff. It really is him. Actually, I'm sure it's him. And of course, when it wasn't, I was like, it was Palmer, isn't it? And I was like, oh Jesus, it's Palmer. Yeah. But I was so thrilled. It's like, that's brilliant, because I love this movie, and I've actually forgotten a key plot point, or ascribed it to the wrong character, which is just as fun.
It's a masterpiece. It really is. I mean, Carpenter's career is replete with fantastic films, but that one is something on another level, isn't it?
If heaven forfend there was a fire at the house, it's one of the sort of 10 DVDs I'm rushing in to get. I could just get it again, but I'd rush in to get it.
I was going to say, you could always just buy a new copy. I mean,
I know, but that sort of that pours cold water on the romance, Jack. I just want to be a hero.
It's the effects. I mean, I just can't get over how
thing where he's like Billy Pilgrim. He's unstuck in time. He starts his career 3 times, and then gets big, and then starts his career 3 times. And he keeps making these films that are sort of hackneyed. They're on things that have been done a million times. Like, a lot of the contemporary reviews of Halloween were like, oh, it's another bloody slasher movie, and we think of Halloween as kind of like the original template stroke progenitor of the slasher film as we know it. But loads of people at the time were like, old news, seen this a million times, who gives a shit? But at the same, he's doing that. He is doing that. But at the same time, he's making a film that is intensely of its moment. This is true of so many of his films, like In the Mouth of Madness, That They Live, The Thing, Prince of Darkness. So completely embedded in there, but kind of come into their own really 2-3 decades down the line sometimes. And he keeps doing this.
It does seem to be a thing with his work. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the one I always look at in this regard is In the Mouth of Madness, because it was not well regarded when it came. In fact, it almost sort of just came and went. There wasn't even like negative press. It just didn't make any impact at all. Yeah. Largely ignored. But it has become so fondly remembered. It's become a fairly significant text for people.
Yeah. I think I've just finished writing a 4-part essay series about it, as you know, and I think it's got an almost completely unique narrative and conceptual structure.
Gosh, it really does.
Yep.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think it's a stunner of a film. I think it's an absolute stunner of a film. I mean,
absolutely, except some things that are a bit like it's an amazing film. And it's another example of one of his films that comes into its own, that seems to only become more relevant with time, etc., etc. And yet, as you say, at the time, people were just like, "Oh, it's another John Carpenter film." Yep. Like, what?
It was on release. It was largely shrugged at. It was largely shrugged at. It was at the cinema for a very brief time. And
I do remember. I remember being a teenager in the 90s, and just there was something in the critical and cultural air. I mean, I'm sure this is true of many decades and many periods, but this is the one I lived through, so of course it's going to be the one that's burnt on my memory more. Of, generally speaking, anything that was by an artist that was associated with either the previous decade or the one before that, they were not going to be able to land it in the 90s. It was immediately, even before it was that was true for music. It was true for directors. It was true for anyone in any art form. It seemed. It's like, oh, you're an 80s person, or you're a 70s. No, there was a real bulkhead drawn in the 90s. The 90s didn't.
Yes, that's absolutely. That's a really good point. That was a real thing in the 90s.
Being disinterested and unmoved,
to give any attention or any credence. We know what you're thinking of as well, Elliot. You're thinking of Bowie, because Bowie did great work in the 90s. I mean, you and I both appreciate.
Well, in fact, my favourite work of his is the 90s stuff, to be honest. But again, that's to do with, I was part of that, that time as well. But also, he was freed from the things that he would have had to have done in the 70s and 80s. But yes, but it was immediate. I mean, it was, I mean, even in more rarefied parts of culture, like the art world, for example, suddenly even big names, people like Jeff Koons and people like that said, "No, you're an 80s guy. You're out. You're out." I mean, I didn't necessarily mind Jeff Koons being out, but I mean, it was like, you're out. But it was just, it didn't matter what a person did, and even if their work got in some way looked at, but largely it was either ignored or just flat out repudiated. You're not part of our cultural moment. It was very strong.
It was a thing in the 90s, though, wasn't it? There was an ethos of just profound disinterest, of not being impressed by anything.
Yes. And contempt for the recent past, particularly in the culture industries. That was, and particularly in in criticism and reviewing. Yeah. Like the NME and things like that. If you read them back in the day, that was endemic in those sorts of things. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
I mean,
and yet there were these weird exceptions of, and they were usually people who should have been rejected for different reasons, like Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson carried through, despite the fact that by the 90s lights, it should have been like, oh, he's 80s, fuck off. And yet he was carried through the 90s, despite the fact that he was Michael Jackson, doing what we have that Michael Jackson was doing.
Whereas the bulkhead was pulled down on Prince about not far into the 90s.
Yes.
I mean, consider.
Yes, that's the perfect comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, Prince got to about 93. And Diamonds and Pearls was okay, that's fine. And then suddenly it became very not only resistant but savage against him.
Yeah.
But yes, in so many fields at that point, there was one that just floated across my mind in a different art form, and it just went again. Or as you say, there would be curious things, because there was certainly a revival, certainly in this country, of the fortunes of the Beatles. But of course, the Beatles had gone through a decade plus of being loathed.
Yeah.
Of being basically you're actually not all that. And what did you really influence anyway? Actually, they were underground were more of an influence than you on most bands. And then suddenly in the 90s, they were very much back on the agenda as if they had never not been thing.
They kind of got folded into that reactionary side of the Britpop Cool Britannia thing, didn't they? Where suddenly Union Jacks were on everything because pop culture had rediscovered mod.
Yeah.
And suddenly people like Noel Gallagher and everything were resurrecting sort of these, and it was always tinged with this kind of reactionary, nationalistic, swaggering nostalgia, wasn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely, it was.
There were some fantastic bands that came out of that period. Well, maybe three. Suede and Pulp, and actually a few of the minor bands were really, really good. But and actually Suede were a bit pre it, but Pulp were pre it. But of course they became the darlings of it. But they've been going for about 10 years beforehand. But like any media-led movement, it wasn't like, I mean, there was a degree of manufacture to the UK punk scene, but it still came out of designers and chancers like Malcolm McLaren, whereas in the 90s it was led by the establishment media. So it's
completely defanged.
So it's like, well, you're talking about something that doesn't really exist, but you've brought it together, and then people are now joining it thinking there's an aesthetic in mind. It's rather how sequels like the Halloween sequels operate.
Very much so, right?
Then everyone misunderstands what the initial thing was.
Interestingly, the 90s was the era of the horror sequel and franchise, wasn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, and people go through this interesting thing. I mean, Carpenter now, rather revered. I mean, Bowie before the end of his life, revered by the same people who had really attacked him in the 90s. But there's this thing. I think it's almost like you're young and hip and happening in your 20s, and you can just get away with it into your 30s, and then there's this. You still around? And that's your sort of 40s and 50s. You still fucking around, and then if you make it to your 60s, it's like, oh, that cool old dude, or that cool old dudette who lasted and made it through the other side, and now they're cool again, and we really like them, and we really like their work. And honestly, if Carpenter goes back into the fray, just made a movie, he
is retired now, isn't he? He doesn't,
retired,
he doesn't make films anymore.
But I think if he came out of retirement and did, and I don't even think it would have to be that great, but he would be exactly in that thing. He would get the notoriety that In the Mouth of Madness deserved, but didn't, simply because you're not one of the 90s guys. What are you still doing, man? Why are you still here? Whereas now it would be
fascinating to see what he would make of this particular zeitgeist, of this decade, of this era.
I often wonder if he would have too many ideas. That's the problem.
There's so much, isn't there?
There's too
so
much
to
horror.
explore. I mean, it worked for Lynch.
You could just kind of grab a copy of it and chuck it at you and say, "There you go. I've already done this."
I've already done this. Yeah.
I suppose he could. Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, I don't know what his views are about television and long form television, Carpenters, I mean, but give him an event series like Lynch had a few years ago. If they're not making movies, they can't get the money, and they're not going to be able to do independence. It would be very interesting to see Carpenter work in a long form format.
That would be fascinating, wouldn't it? So maybe even revisiting a familiar franchise.
Absolutely.
I think there is definitely a long form series in the Mouth of Madness in Prince of Darkness. You could merge those two. Those two could be part of
they dovetail. Oh, They Live, yeah. Gosh, They Live.
Oh,
They Live is actually the one with the clearest premise for like a long form series.
Yeah,
actually.
Totally.
It's one of the extraordinary things about watching a film like They Live in the context of the long form 21st century series. It feels like the edited highlights. Of something that was meant to go on for 4 seasons, or whatever.
The Thing would be an obvious one. The Thing, again, I mean, it's there. It's almost ready made, isn't it?
Yeah. What I adore about I'm saying, seeing it again. And again, it's that wonderful sleight of hand thing he does. He basically sets you up to think that it's the sequel to the first movie, the Howard Hawks movie, because it's now a different base, and then puts in, oh no, these are they're Norwegians and everything. But he's already set an aesthetic sequel up. You're already seeing the third act of a much bigger film. It's a great trick to pull.
It's really clever.
I know they have gone back since, and I've never seen it.
It's garbage.
But
they don't.
The fact that it's like you were basically starting halfway through a movie.
The tragic thing about that is that it's a prequel. It's not a sequel. Or a remake. It's actually it's a prequel. It's designed to sort of.
It's the Norwegians.
Exactly. It's designed to slot in. It's designed to be like you can watch the second film and then you watch the first film, and it's like it flows directly on from it. The tragic thing about that is there's a lot of talent involved in that. I mean, firstly, they have Mary Elizabeth Winstead as the main character, which is a huge plus because she's great. But the directors wanted to do it all with practical effects. And they actually did loads of it with practical effects. And the studio refused to release it with practical effects. Not because they were bad, but because they said, this is just not what cinema is now. We do it with CGI. And they had to go back and remount loads of it and put CGI over the top of what they'd done.
That's
and of course you end up in the Star Wars universe where you come to the prequels of the 90s. Like, why does everything look so?
Of course, the other big problem with the prequel is that it's telling a story that just doesn't need to be told. You get everything in the original film.
You don't need it.
You don't need it. It's all there. And it does nothing that's even remotely as interesting as what happens in the 1980s film.
No. And again, we're back to, I mean, I say I haven't seen it, but I've seen a few clips of it, but we're back into, the very texture of film versus digital. The fact that the thing is, or was, modestly budgeted by comparison to, I mean, these things end up working
Still some of the best organic effects I have ever seen. Ever seen. They look they feel so limpy and organic and
revolutionary moment. I mean, for Rob Bottin to be involved in a film like that and make those effects. I mean, he basically became the architect of that kind of design for the rest of the decade and beyond. I mean, how amazing to have his back to the wall and very little money, be able to do this stuff, and then suddenly he's like the go-to guy.
Well, why wouldn't he be? I mean, my God, it's incredible.
I mean, it's incredible. It is, conceptually and in terms of the craft.
Yeah. To conceive of all that, I mean, like to draw up the designs for all of that, the way body and anatomy is altered and transformed in that film is amazing to me.
And because what's set up in the early scenes, i.e. with the dog transformation, and then by the time you've got someone in the snow basically wearing a big rubber glove, you're already sold.
You're in.
Yeah. So when you get the cheaper practical effects, that you're already there. So you'll buy anything. Big tentacle at the end, I'll buy that.
Yep, fine.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's been a proper. I mean, 2023 for us really was the year of Carpenter.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah,
it really was. I mean,
and to kind of bring it back again, there is a kind of a continuity even between John Carpenter and M.R. James, and it goes to show you what an important, influential and pivotal figure James is in the history of uncanny and Gothic literature, because James is very much about bodies and physicality and sensation.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Very much so, and it's unusual.
And eyes and teeth and hair, and it's unusual for its time. Yeah,
it is very unusual for its time, and I imagine quite shocking for readers of the era.
And amorphous or pure shape as
don't think
the uncanny thing that connects them as well.
Yeah, it's attained in all sorts of establishment signifiers and signifiers of respectability, kind of allowed them to pass. I think anyway, allowed the stories to pass through respectable society as what they sort of cosplay as what they claim to be. Ghost stories. Whereas in fact, the best of them are to a huge extent stories. Monsters and physical transformation and mutation and evil and malevolence and stuff like that. So they should have been more controversial and more shocking than they were. I think they wore the cloak of respectability so well that people they got away with it. But they're massive. The irony of that is that they're down to the fact that there is this little quiet I think there is a line to be drawn. That Denniston sees on his desk in the demon that is described in that story, up to things like The Thing.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, they kind of remind me in that regard of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's a similar overlap. Because that also
and that's
seems
another
to get
story
away
that is. Yes, exactly. That's another story that's very transgressive, but it was assimilated by Victorian society because people were able to imagine that it had all these sorts of respectable, moralistic, meanings about how you're supposed to behave as a respectable middle-class citizen.
Which is
Vickers went into the pulpit and said, no, actually, this is a very moral book about how you should be a good Christian gentleman. And people went, oh, great, okay, I can read it then. And they loved it because it's actually full of all these perversities.
Yeah, it's so salacious. I mean, it's implied. Obviously, you don't actually see anything. But my God, it's that one line for me in Jekyll and Hyde, that one line right at the beginning where it makes it absolutely plain that Jekyll is already gallivanting about town and doing God knows what. He's doing everything that Hyde does. He's just ashamed of it, which is why he creates Hyde. Right? That is it for me. That is the key to the entire text.
In fact, one of the only adaptations that pulls on that at all is the Spencer Tracy one. There's intimation, there's talk between people of, oh well, Henry's settled down. He was quite the boy, you know. That's the only one I can really think of that there are so few.
This sort of visionary sequences where I think it's Lana Turner and Ingrid Bergman are sort of implied to be pony girls pulling Henry Jekyll's chariot, and you get this weird little intimation of BDSM sex and stuff.
It's a very bizarre, not a wholly successful
He's whipping
film, but
them,
there's some
course.
really interesting moments in it.
But thematically, that's closer to the original text than any of the other adaptations, because almost all of the others do the same thing, which is they paint Jekyll as almost like this innocent. Which he's not. He's absolutely not.
And the fact they don't lather on simian makeup and all that. They just let Tracy, I mean, they do a certain thing, but it's basically just changing hair.
That's
kind of it. But it's a little bit closer to that was great.
It's that Michael Caine one that gets me. I mean, there are elements of that I really love. It's really interesting, but the way it draws association with physical deformity and evil is really it's very hard to take. It's very hard to take. And also the way it tries to apologize for Jekyll and his excesses. It's like, no, fuck off.
Yeah. I mean, I have not seen that since
idea of a link between.
But the
physical deformity and evil is an ancient one, and it's a fascinating and complex set of associations.
But it's the way I think it's the way this one does it, where it literally models Hyde after the Elephant Man, after
Joseph Merrick. Yeah.
And it's like, that's a bad.
Talk about missing the point of that story.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's just what are Victorian things? That's basically as far as it stretches. What are Victorian things that we can put in the same
That's exactly
frame?
it. That's what they've done. That's what they've done. And
we've got Ripper, and we've got Joseph Merrick, and we've got Jekyll and Hyde. And they just put them in the same. The only thing that I saw that go out. I think it was about 1990. And again,
92, I think it was.
Oh, 92.
92. Yeah.
Still too young for it. I think
the only reason I know is because I rewatched it over this Christmas period.
Right. I still think the last scene destroyed me as a child. I was so frightened by the last scene.
Yeah. I mean, there are moments in it that are actually really unpleasant. There is a sequence where a character is implied to be raped by Hyde, and it's really harrowing. It's like, whoa.
But bearing in mind that as we have established on many an episode, I'd been watching inappropriate things. It's the kind of the stone tape thing. The end of the stone tape. Even now as an adult, the end of the stone tape really fucks me up.
Yeah, it's an electrical product.
Yeah. But the end of the last, which is an addition, of course, it's an addition to Stevenson. It's not anywhere in the text, but it's that combination of deformity and paedophobia. It's all there in that last scene, but it's just so. It's so frightening when it's
that
the child.
Final scene is bad, isn't it? I mean, it's like, what? And also, that child, by the way, is the product of the rape.
Yes,
it's like, holy fuck! It's like, Jesus, what are you trying to do here?
And that seriously screwed me up as a kid. The implication,
because
but even by that point, I knew what the implication of the earlier scene meant and why this child looked like Henry Jekyll. Like Hyde, actually, like Edward Hyde. But everything about it, I just remember the whole way the thing was shot and the reveal and everything, and it's serious nightmares. For weeks.
It is disturbingly shot, that final sequence. The reveal is very clever. It's very well done,
because it's just things that don't join as well, because I know the actor I didn't know this as a child, but I know I've read it subsequently. That's an adult male. But it's a little person. And in fact, I know the actor from other films.
Oh, interesting.
So, and you can kind of tell that it's not a child. So there's an extra layer of dissociation of, there's something not quite ringing true. And that just added to the whole, thing.
It's an odd product. It's a really strange product.
But it's an odd product in so many respects, because obviously a couple of years earlier, Wicks had done his Jack the Ripper, which he had started making, and then American backing came in, and then it was made like almost like a kind of Hallmark thing. It's a very peculiar production.
Well, this has a similar feeling about it, actually. This has a sort of Hallmark
same sets.
I always thought of them as a pair when I was a kid.
Yeah.
A
lot of the same supporting actors, and of course the same star, and because of course it was, I mean, the Wicks original Ripper was Barry Foster, and lots of different people. A few were held over. I mean, Ken Bones still played Robert Lees. He was held over, but most of them were sacked and recast with bigger names.
Right, of course.
I think that Ken Bones probably kept Robert Lees because he was in a very weird, compromised, doesn't really work thing. He's fucking brilliant in it as Robert Lees. But again, it's got some really great moments in it, but it's also incredibly weird. Like, they completely take out all the Masonic stuff with right surrounding William Gull.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
So it doesn't mean it's just sort of it comes about him experimenting.
It's just randomly William Gull.
Sex workers.
Yeah. I was going to say, well, how does that work?
It's all gone, and so it's just they posit this idea that Gull has got some form of dementia, and he's trying to understand it by cutting up prostitutes. It completely makes no sense.
Fair enough. Odd. Very strange.
They make him a psychologist, don't they? And he wasn't a psychologist. He was a physician.
He was a physician. So it's a very odd piece, but it's an odd piece with really interesting bits threaded through it.
Well, what I got from this adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde is that it has these moments of really incongruous, shocking violence and horror, and then these long doldrums of phenomenally boring sort of Victorian dramas of manners and whatnot.
Yeah. They do the same in Jack the Ripper, because they when the American backers became involved, they wanted a leading lady, so they cast Jane Seymour and basically created a character, and she has nothing to do with the story.
That's what happens here. That's obviously
with Cheryl
what
Ladd,
isn't it? I mean, they give the female lead more to do in the Jekyll and Hyde one. Obviously, she's a victim, complete victim all the way through. But it's like, why is she there?
I know.
Again,
but I do remember from the Ripper one that, again, it's one of those. I mean, it's totally schlocky, but very effective. And it is because it at least tries to get to the heart of how impressions from clairvoyance are meant to happen. So there's this fantastic sequence where Ken Bones, who I think is fantastic in that show, he has a vision of one of the Ripper's killings, and he says it is a man wearing armor, and she's got beautiful yellow hair, she's got blonde hair, and she's going to die. And that's not what happens. A brunette. Well, it's Mary Chapman, I think, is killed. Well, it's a brunette who's killed. So there's we see, and there's just this marvelous moment where the camera pans round to a little painting on her dressing table of Sir Lancelot and the girl with the yellow hair, and he's wearing armor, and it's splattered with her blood.
Okay.
But I remember it really unnerved me at times. Oh, of course, it's an impression. But I was a kid. I was susceptible. It was like that's so. As a kid, my kid's brain was that's so fucking good.
Yeah,
brilliant. But he actually still works in a kind of schlocky, lurid kind of way. It's like he was right, but he was wrong, because of course that's in the nature of how clairvoyance is presented as working.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's like the transformation sequence in this Jekyll and Hyde. As a kid, I thought it was brilliant. Yeah. And it is actually quite good. The transformation sequence itself,
like the thing. Actually, it's very in that area, hydraulics and
it's good. I mean, you get all this sort of bubbling
the Jack the Ripper
and
the Jack the Ripper miniseries has a Jekyll and Hyde transition as well, because it has it has Richard Mansfield playing Jekyll and Hyde on stage during which is true. That he was playing Jekyll and Hyde on stage during the Ripper murders. He actually shut up the production because he said that doing a play like that during the spate of murders was bad taste. Yeah. And so both those productions, the production of Jekyll and Hyde and the production about Jack the Ripper, they both contain Jekyll and Hyde transformations.
What's interesting about that is they do it. The stage version in Jack the Ripper does the transformation the wrong way around from the book, because of course when he visits Lanyon at the end,
that's right.
Yes,
he goes
to him as Hyde.
He goes to
and he goes from being Hyde to being Jekyll.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, this won't mean much to you, George, but of course it's who is he on the stage with? He's on the stage with Lightfoot. So there's an extra layer of Victoriana and television Victoriana because he's on the stage with Professor Lightfoot.
he must have gotten that because somebody remembered him in Talons of Weng Chiang. He must have done.
Yeah, totally.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
Oh, just Doctor Who, yeah?
Yeah.
In fact, I read something.
It's an incredibly racist 1970s Doctor Who story, which is set in Victorian London.
I've read articles about that one.
Yeah.
But the similar thing happened. I read recently about, apparently, I don't know. I've not heard it firsthand. I've heard it sort of secondhand, so this might be a little bit garbled. But apparently, a great deal of Blackadder Goes Forth is Richard Curtis remembering the War Games.
Yes, the War Games.
Yeah. The episodes of the War Games.
It's so similar.
So similar.
It's so similar. Yeah.
Some things are lifted.
The actor who plays Captain, can't remember the character's name in the War Games, even looks and sounds like Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
It's the wrong way round. That was in the 1960s. It's a continuity error in reality.
Yeah, exactly. And even the risk scene between General Smythe and von Weich is done with Field Marshal. At the end, where he's brushing the bodies off.
You've got
the sets at the chateau.
That's right. The general's chateau and the dugout and the trench, they look the same.
Exactly the same.
Oh, it looks like when somebody was designing the sets for Blackadder Goes Forth, it's like they based them on the sets that are on the front line in the War Games.
Yeah, but I have read this, that it is a memory. I think Richard Curtis, it's a memory of watching the early episodes of the War Games on television. Yeah,
interesting.
It's nuts, isn't it? It's completely,
that's really.
But I think you're absolutely right about. I'm trying to think of the name of the actor, Trevor Baxter, isn't it? Being Lightfoot.
Trevor Baxter.
Yeah, being also in. It had to be. Yeah, someone's definitely remembered that and gone, we'll put him.
He's in this tiny role, and he's much better than most of the big name actors who were in the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's much better actor than Armand Asante. There you go. That's how it goes.
That's
Brilliant.
how it goes.
Well, guys, shall we draw this one to a close?
That was a pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, that was.
If we don't, then Elliot and I are going to end up doing just Doctor Who geeking out. So I think we better draw a line.
But only vintage.
Yeah,
vintage
I'm so glad we got to do this.
The real one.
I do think people are going to look at like this and think, well, that's really odd. Why are they doing that? It's outside of their usual milieu. But having watched it, it's like, no, not at all. This is so in line with
even down to
else.
the media savvy stuff.
Yeah,
not just the uncanny and the logical and the gothic. It's the media savvy stuff is really there, and the awareness of how to use the medium, which of course takes us right back to where this began.
Well, I certainly hope people go away from this discussion and go and rewatch it actually, and with recontextualized from what is the popular understanding of this as sort of like the antecedent to slasher films.
I really enjoyed it, and I completely accept and even agree with Jack saying about there is a portion of the film where it slows down, and then, as I said, it has to sort of go through the motions of being a slasher picture for a while, because that's the logic for which you get to the other bits. But even allowing for that, I had a really great time with this film.
Likewise. It was interesting to revisit and just see different things in this film that I was so familiar with, but see it in a almost entirely different light to the popular understanding of it.
This is never going to be one of my favorite films. It's nowhere near one of my favorite Carpenters even, but it is a film I've learned to appreciate because I think we've all kind of been on a similar journey where our initial impressions of it gave way to, certainly, I mean, I've told this story before, but certainly the first time I saw it, which again was BBC Two, Movie Drone, Mark Cousins, I did not like it. My initial response to it was just, yeah, that's just a guy with a knife stabbing people. I'm not interested. It's boring. But it was when I rewatched it a few years later and I clocked, no, this is actually an uncanny story. This is actually a hauntological story. It is actually properly a Halloween story because it is about the unstable boundary between the spectral and the uncanny and the material world. I get it now. You know, I have much more appreciation for it. Yeah,
I think that's why that's the root of my interest in it as well. Otherwise, I wouldn't, because I'm just not interested in slasher films, to be honest. And it's not a slight against those who do. It's not a morality thing as such. I just don't find them interesting.
There are some giallos I like, but generally, it's similar. Yeah.
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 No, this
actually
is.
struggling
I mean,
to
this
think of
wasn't
some.
really. We weren't supposed to be doing this now. This was supposed to be part of Spooktober, but you know, life. So
yeah.
But we got it done.
Life being what it is.
Yeah.
Halloween and New Year, I like it.
Halloween and New Year, I like it too. I do kind of like it, to be honest. And
John Carpenter's early January.
Yeah. He came back twice.
John Carpenter's 12th night.
So, like, next time, guys, what would you like to do? Would you like to go for Hereditary next, or would you like to move back to the Hannibal stuff?
Evil be the food of. Anyway, sorry. Oh well, I mean,
I don't mind. I'm open.
Really, I mean, either is great for me. That's such a cop out, isn't it? But either is great for me. I mean, I know Hannibal is there.
I vote for Hereditary because we were. I feel like if we get Hereditary done, then we'll sort of we'll tie off the end of this little
and then really
departure.
Get back into
and then we can
Hannibal.
get back to the old. Yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, I would love to get into Hereditary, having rewatched it again recently and just been.
Yeah. I feel like Hereditary does flow from Halloween as well.
Yeah,
I feel like they are relevant to each other. So yeah.
I mean, consciously so in one or two scenes.
Yes. Thematically, it certainly sort of ties off everything that we've spoken about in this season. So, yeah, I think it'd be a good one to do. And also, I mean, I just love the thought of people who haven't seen it going away from that discussion and watching it and just being traumatized by the damn thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, I've already road tested this now, so it's time to show it to Vic.
It's a one, isn't it?
It was on my shelf for 18 months.
Wow.
And because so many people that I'd said, oh yeah, I'm going to, oh, you're not watching that, are you? It's only 15. And me still playing the whole classification game. No, it's only 15, I'm a big boy now. And then no, it's really, and I took such a run up at it, and I did watch it alone first. And freaked myself out. So now it was my promise to Vic. She said, I'm happy to watch it, but you're going to have to road test that one first.
That's a good, a road test is a very good idea for that one.
This is a slight tangent, but I feel like we do have at some point in the next year or couple of years, we do have Robert Eggers' Nosferatu remake coming up. I feel like if we're still doing that then, and certainly if we're going to carry on with Hannibal, I think we probably will be. I think we should try to all see that as soon as we can, and then talk about that, because I'm so looking forward to that.
That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Because we don't tend to do like very new films.
We don't. No.
So that would be a nice change.
No, even the newer ones like Midsummer and The Witch are still now quite old.
As cinema goes, they're getting edging into classic territory, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh,
bit like us.
A bit like ours, exactly that.
Well, you'll always be the baby of this triumvirate.
I know, I always am. I don't know why. Any given group, I always am the baby. I don't know why that is. Before we go, guys, what would you like to pimp out?
Absolutely nothing. I've I've done my hard work for 2023. People came and watched it and went away, and my 2024 hasn't properly started yet. Only really, really dull things that I do not wish to promote or pimp out, because they're horrible, horrible things like advertising, for which I will go to hell for.
Okay,
we're all going to hell, Elliot. I don't think you need to worry particularly.
I'm fine with that. I just worry about what level of a Dantean hell I would end up on. If it's the Circle of Lust, I'm fine. I don't care. If it's the Circle of Greed, fine. Don't care.
Yeah, there's just certain places that I could have certain regions quite happy to avoid. So yes,
Bulgers wouldn't really want to go there.
I'm exempt, but I know you two gentlemen actually, have creative energy and actually do stuff. So I pass the buck to you.
Fair enough, Jack.
I'm back on the old writing bike at the moment. I've been sort of a few years now where I've sort of been. It's been a combination of a bit burnt out writing, and at the same time concentrating on the I Don't Speak German podcast, which is still on hiatus. But that is the big important work of mine from recent years. Although most of the work is Daniel's, so check that out. It's a podcast about the far right where Daniel tells me about assorted far right figures and organizations, although there is other stuff where we talk about movies and so on and so forth, and I interview interesting people. So that's a good podcast. That's my main thing. But yeah, as I say, I'm kind of back on the old writing bike. So I've been publishing some stuff recently, including a series of essays about John Carpenter's movie In the Mouth of Madness that I'm quite pleased with. And I'm going to be continuing writing essays about films of that type, including some of the films that we talked about in this series. That's the plan anyway. I'm also, as I've mentioned in this, I'm planning to start writing about M.R. James and the adaptation. So that's coming up, hopefully. And that's all at Eruditorium Press. And if you want to follow my daily priceless thoughts and get links to everything, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm actually properly not on Twitter anymore because they chucked me off.
Properly gone, yeah.
Yeah, because somebody went through my old tweets and found a tweet where I said, Nazis follow your leader, and they reported me for advocating suicide, and Twitter got in touch with me and said, we're going to lock your account unless you delete that tweet. And I said, there's no way in hell I'm ever deleting that tweet. So I can't even get in now. So I'm completely done with Twitter. But I am on Blue Sky. And I have a Patreon. You can give me $1 a month and get advance access to everything I do, unless of course I do it so late that I have to post it immediately, in which case you're shit out of luck. But there you go. I do
links below, guys.
I do audiobooks and podcasts, and you get advance access to things like this, for instance. So
absolutely,
that's me.
Brilliant. Links to that all below, guys. As for myself, you can find me here on Exaggerated Elegy, where there are lots of discussions like this, video game let's plays, and all sorts of stuff. If you go over to Arrow Films, as we mentioned during the podcast, you'll find the new Hellraiser Blu-ray and UHD set, which Kit Power and myself feature on the Hellbound disc on the featurette Hell is What They Wanted, which I believe Jack has seen now, and you as well, Elliot.
Just recently watched that.
Yes,
so good, so bloody good.
Congratulations.
Yeah, amazing stuff.
It was fun. In terms of published work, you can find links to all of my published short story collections over at strangeplaygrounds.com. And if you go and type in George Daniel Lee at Amazon, you'll find all of the short stories and things that I've had published in various different anthologies and collections and whatnot. I still am knocking about Twitter occasionally, but very rarely these days. My principal contact point is going to be Blue Sky from now on, I think. Or you can come and find me over at Facebook as well. And from that, I think that's it, guys. Thank you. It was great catching up again. It really, really was. It's been a bit of a hard sort of period, to be honest. It's the latter half of 2023 wasn't great. So this has been really nice. It's been really, really nice.
Oh, good to hear.
Yes, likewise.
Excellent. And thank you for listening along at home, guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.